In recent years, scientists and engineers have started working on something that sounds like science fiction, but is very real: a giant ship made to carry thousands of people far away from Earth. This ship is not for tourism or ordinary exploration. It was designed for one single purpose: to save humanity from disappearing forever. The idea came up because our planet faces enormous dangers, like asteroids, climate changes, and even the death of our sun billions of years from now. If something terrible happens here, this ship would be our only chance to keep existing somewhere in the universe. But can we actually build something so big and complex in time? Get ready to fall asleep while listening to this video. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment which part of the world you're watching from. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Imagine everything you've ever known, every person, every memory, every forest and ocean, gone. Not from war, but from a simple and indifferent roll of the cosmic dice. That's why we're talking about a salvation arc today, not as science fiction, but as a cold, hard insurance policy for our entire species. The idea stems from a simple, uncomfortable truth we often ignore. Earth is not a permanent home. It's a beautiful, fragile oasis that exists within a solar system and a universe filled with forces that are frankly apathetic to our existence. Building an ark isn't about abandoning our planet. It's about finally growing up as a civilization and acknowledging the very real threats that could erase us, ensuring that the flame of humanity isn't snuffed out by a single catastrophe. Let's talk about those threats, because they're not imaginary monsters from movies. They're documented, studied, and waiting in the cosmic calendar. The most classic, the one we've all seen in films, is the asteroid impact. We know it's happened before, with the dinosaurs being the most famous example. The Chicxulub impactor, an asteroid roughly 6 miles wide, changed the planet's climate for years and wiped out around 75% of all species. Today, NASA and other agencies track near-Earth objects, and while we've catalogued most of the civilization enders, the key word is asterisk most asterisk. A dark, fast-moving rock from the outer solar system could give us a warning time measured in months, not years. The impact itself would be just the beginning. The ensuing impact winter from debris blocking the sun would collapse agriculture globally. We have plans to deflect such objects, but those technologies are in their infancy. Successful deflection requires early detection and immense precision. The Ark exists as the backup for the scenario where our deflection mission fails, or where we simply don't see the threat coming in time. But space rocks aren't the only immediate danger. Look inward, to the very ground beneath our feet. Supervolcanoes are a terrestrial threat just as potent. The Yellowstone caldera is the famous one, but there are others around the world. An eruption of that scale wouldn't just be a big bang and lava flows, it would be a planetary climate event. Thousands of cubic miles of ash and sulfur dioxide would be injected into the stratosphere, circling the globe and reflecting sunlight away for a decade or more. Global temperatures would plummet, growing seasons would vanish, and worldwide famine would follow. Unlike an asteroid, you can't deflect a supervolcano. You can only hope to survive the aftermath, and with global supply chains shattered, survival on Earth would become a brutal, desperate struggle for the few. The Ark, in orbit or en route elsewhere, would be insulated from that atmospheric catastrophe, its closed ecosystem providing continuity while Earth recovers over centuries. Then there are the biological threats. We lived through a global pandemic recently, and while it was devastating, COVID-19 was a relatively mild pathogen in the grand scheme. It had a low mortality rate compared to something like smallpox or a novel, engineered virus. The threat of a pandemic with both the high transmissibility of something like measles and the lethality of Ebola is a nightmare scenario that keeps epidemiologists awake. In our hyper-connected world, such a pathogen could circle the globe in weeks. Our medical systems are designed for sporadic outbreaks, not a simultaneous global catastrophic biological event. Research into pathogens, both natural and potentially leaked or weaponized, shows that the probability of such an event in the next century, while low, is not zero. The Ark community in strict quarantine and with a controlled, sterile environment would be the ultimate isolation ward, preserving humanity even if a plague resets civilization on Earth. These are the acute threats, the sudden disasters. But there are also slow-moving, inevitable ones. Climate change is the most pressing we face today. While the goal is absolutely to mitigate and adapt on Earth, we must also consider worst-case scenarios. If positive feedback loops trigger runaway warming or cooling beyond our capacity to control, Earth could become profoundly hostile to large-scale civilization over centuries. Think about rising sea levels not just flooding cities, but shifting weather patterns so drastically that breadbasket regions become deserts. Think about ocean acidification collapsing the marine food web. A slow decline might not kill everyone, but it could erode the technological and agricultural base needed to support billions, leading to a new dark age. The Ark project would require technologies for perfect closed-loop life support, water and air recycling, and food production under artificial lights technologies that could also be used to create resilient, self-sufficient habitats on a recovering Earth, or, if necessary, sustain the population until a new planet is reached. And looking far, far into the future, we have the ultimate certainty, the evolution of our Sun. In about 5 billion years, the Sun will exhaust the hydrogen in its core and begin to swell into a red giant star. The habitable zone will move outward, and Earth will first become a scorched desert, then likely be engulfed. This is a timeline so vast it feels meaningless, but it sets an absolute expiration date on life on Earth. More immediately, in just a billion years or so, the Sun's gradual increase in luminosity will likely trigger a moist greenhouse effect on Earth, boiling the oceans away. A species that thinks in terms of generations needs to think beyond its own star. The Ark is the first monumental step toward becoming an interstellar species. It is the tangible acceptance that our future is not tied to one world, but to the galaxy itself. Some argue that these risks, individually, have low statistical probabilities in any given century. That's true. But when you combine the annual probability of a large asteroid impact, a supervolcanic eruption, a catastrophic pandemic, plus the long-term certainty of stellar evolution, the cumulative chance over 1,000 years, or 10,000, becomes a near certainty. We buy fire insurance for our homes not because we expect a fire, but because the consequence of a fire without insurance is total ruin. The Ark is fire insurance for humanity. The philosophical premise is straightforward. Putting all of your eggs in one basket is a terrible survival strategy when the basket is fragile and sits in a shooting gallery. Earth is that basket. It's vulnerable to impacts from space, to geological upheavals, to atmospheric changes, and to biological threats. Our history is a story of resilience, but also of immense fragility. Entire civilizations have collapsed due to regional climate shifts or disease. The Ark represents a deliberate move away from that fragility. It is the recognition that to endure for millennia or eons, we must diversify our habitats. This isn't a surrender, but an expansion. It's the logical next step for a species that has already spread to every continent on its home planet. The project itself, the sheer scale of it, would force unprecedented advancements in energy, material science, agriculture, and closed system ecology. Many of these technologies would have immediate but profound benefits for life on Earth, helping us solve sustainability crises and improve resilience. So the Ark isn't just a lifeboat, it's also a catalyst for a better, more durable civilization here. But the core justification remains existential risk management. We develop vaccines not because we're sure we will get the disease, but because we want to be prepared if we're exposed. We build seawalls not because we're certain of a flood, but because we know floods can happen. The Salvation Ark is the ultimate expression of this precautionary principle on a species-wide scale. It is the collective decision that humanity is worth preserving, that our story is worth continuing, even if the worst should befall our beautiful blue-green cradle. It acknowledges that the universe is under no obligation to keep us safe, so we must take that responsibility upon ourselves. The challenges are monumental, perhaps the greatest we will ever face. The engineering seems like magic, the resources required are staggering, and the social and ethical questions are daunting. But the alternative is to remain passive, to hope that the cosmic dice never roll against us, to bet everything on the continued perfect stability of a single fragile planet. History and science tell us that is a losing bet in the long run. The Ark is how we finally decide to stop gambling with our future. It is the tangible expression of a hope that stretches beyond our own lifetimes, beyond our own planet, and into the distant future. It's about ensuring that one day a child born under the light of an alien sun can look up at the stars and know they are home, because their ancestors had the courage and foresight to build a vessel that carried the essence of humanity across the dark ocean of space. That journey begins not with a rocket launch, but with a simple, sober understanding. We need a plan B because the universe is full of forces that don't care about plan A. This understanding, this existential trigger, is the foundational reason to even begin contemplating such a vessel. It shifts the question from why build it to how can we afford not to try? Every discussion about propulsion, ecology, population and cost rests on this bedrock premise. Without accepting the reality and variety of these extinction-level threats, the project seems like a fantastical waste. But once you truly internalize the vulnerabilities of our current situation, the Ark transforms from a dream into a dire necessity, the most important project we could ever undertake. It is the ultimate legacy we could leave, a message in a bottle sent to our own distant future saying simply, we were here and we chose to continue. So you're convinced we need an Ark, a lifeboat for humanity. The existential threats are real and the case for a plan B is solid. But the moment you try to imagine building such a thing, your mind boggles. This isn't just a bigger version of the International Space Station. It's not even a fleet of large ships. You're talking about constructing an entire self-sufficient city that must float in the void, protecting and sustaining thousands of human lives, possibly for centuries. The scale is so monumental, it redefines the word engineering. Think about the difference between a small fishing boat and a modern aircraft carrier, then multiply that difference by 1,000. We are venturing into the realm of megastructures, where the very principles of construction have to be reimagined from the ground up, or more accurately, from the vacuum out. The first and most fundamental design challenge is gravity. Our bodies are built for it. Our muscles, our bones, our cardiovascular systems, even the way our inner ear works, all depend on the constant pull of Earth. In microgravity, astronauts experience muscle atrophy, bone density loss at a rate of about 1% per month, fluid shifts that affect vision, and a host of other issues. A multi-year mission to Mars is a serious health risk. A multi-generation voyage is impossible without a solution. Therefore, the Ark cannot be a conventional spacecraft. It must generate its own gravity. The only feasible way we know to do that in space is through centrifugal force. Imagine a giant wheel or a cylinder rotating in space. The inside surface of the rim becomes the floor, and the rotation flings anything inside outward, creating a steady push that feels like gravity. This is not some new idea. It's been in science fiction for a century and is grounded in solid physics. For a comfortable Earth-like environment, you need a large radius. A small, fast-spinning ring would cause disorientation and Coriolis effects, where moving your head might make you feel dizzy. Studies suggest a radius of at least several hundred meters, with a rotation rate of maybe 1 or 2 revolutions per minute to create a stable 1G environment. So, the primary shape of our Ark likely becomes a massive rotating ring, or a series of rings, or perhaps a long rotating cylinder like the classic O'Neill cylinder concept. This rotating habitat is the backbone of the entire design, the foundation upon which everything else is built. Inside this rotating structure, we are not designing rooms, we are designing a biosphere. You have to lay out an entire miniature civilization. There will be residential districts, but calling them apartments feels inadequate. These would be neighbourhoods with living spaces, communal areas, and privacy designed into the architecture from the start. You need agricultural zones, vast stretches of land under artificial suns, growing genetically optimized crops in layered hydroponic or aeroponic farms for maximum yield. This isn't a few pots of lettuce, it's industrial-scale farming that must be perfectly integrated into the life support recycling loops. You need industrial and manufacturing modules. This city cannot just consume, it must repair itself. It needs machine shops, fabrication bays using 3-dimensional printing with recycled materials, and labs to produce spare parts, medicines and tools. You need water and air processing plants, which are the literal lungs and kidneys of the vessel running continuously. You need power generation and distribution hubs, managing the flow of energy from the main reactors to every corner of the habitat. You need governance centres, schools, hospitals and research facilities. And crucially, you need spaces for leisure, for psychology, for community, parks, gyms, theatres, virtual reality suites, and places of worship or quiet contemplation. The layout must be intuitive and efficient, minimizing travel time while also providing a sense of space and variety to avoid the feeling of being trapped in a metal can. The social geography is as important as the physical geography. Now, wrap this entire intricate, rotating city in a shell, and that shell becomes the most critical component after life support. Radiation shielding. In Earth orbit, our planet's magnetic field deflects most harmful cosmic radiation. In deep space, there is no such protection. The crew would be bombarded by galactic cosmic rays, high-energy particles from distant supernovae, and occasional solar particle events from our own sun. This radiation increases cancer risk, can cause central nervous system damage, and is a showstopper for long-term habitation. The shielding, therefore, must be immense. We are not talking about a thin layer of aluminum. Proposals include using the spacecraft's own water supply as a shield, storing it in tanks around the outer hull. Water, rich in hydrogen, is excellent at blocking radiation. Other ideas involve using regolith, the soil from the moon or an asteroid, packed into containers as a barrier. Some even speculate about creating artificial magnetic fields, like a miniature version of Earth's magnetosphere, though the energy requirements are staggering. This shield adds enormous mass. Every square metre of living space needs metres of thickness and protective material around it. This directly leads to the next unavoidable truth. This vessel can never be built on Earth. The sheer mass of it makes launching it from our planet's gravity, well, utterly impractical, even with futuristic launch systems. The cost would be beyond any rational calculation, so construction must happen in space. This means developing an entire space-based industrial infrastructure. We would need to mine raw materials from near-Earth asteroids or from the moon. We would need to process those materials in microgravity or using the moon's low gravity, smelting metals, refining glass, producing plastics and composites. We would need construction drones and robotic arms of incredible size and precision, operated by teams of space-based workers living in temporary construction stations. The Ark itself would be assembled piece by massive piece in a high orbit, perhaps at a Lagrange point where gravitational forces balance, making it stable. This construction project would be the largest engineering undertaking in human history, spanning decades, maybe even a century. It would require a permanent human presence in space just to build it, effectively creating a new spacefaring culture of engineers and workers before the Ark even takes its first passenger. This scale changes everything about the materials we use. We can't just use aerospace aluminum. We need materials with incredible tensile strength, durability over centuries, and resistance to micrometeoroid impacts. A tiny piece of debris travelling at orbital velocities can punch a hole in standard hulls. The outer hull might be a multi-layer system, a Whipple shield to vaporise small impacts, followed by layers of composite materials and the main radiation shielding. The internal structure must handle the stresses of rotation, the changing loads as resources are consumed and shifted around, and the thermal cycles of moving between sunlight and shadow. The systems must be hyper-redundant. If a critical water pipe bursts on Earth, you call a plumber. On the Ark, a major failure in a core system could mean death for everyone, so every vital system needs backups for its backups, and the design must allow for safe maintenance and repair without shutting down entire sections. The electrical grid, the data network, the air scrubbing systems all must be modular and repairable. This introduces another layer of complexity. The need for massive internal access ways, service tunnels and robotic crawlers that can diagnose and fix problems from both inside and outside the hull. The Ark is not a static object. It is a living mechanical organism that must constantly maintain itself. The psychological impact of living inside such a structure is also a design parameter. The sky would be the inner surface of the cylinder or ring curving overhead, likely lined with LED panels simulating a terrestrial sky, a cycle of day and night, maybe even clouds. The interior landscape would need to be designed to prevent disorientation, with clear visual cues for up and down. The arrangement of buildings, hills and water features would be carefully planned to create vistas, to avoid a claustrophobic tunnel feeling, and to provide a connection to a naturalistic environment, however artificial. Lighting would be a science in itself, tuned not just for plant growth but for human circadian rhythms and mental health. Acoustics would matter deeply, as the constant hum of machinery would need to be dampened into a comfortable background. Every sensory detail would be part of the design. Finally, the propulsion system, which we will delve into later, integrates with this massive structure. The engines, likely mounted on a central spine or at one end of the cylinder, must push this unimaginable weight. The structure must transfer that thrust evenly through its frame without causing catastrophic stress or making the rotating habitat wobble. The connection between the spinning living section and the non-spinning engine section or docking ports would be a masterpiece of engineering in itself, likely using magnetic bearings in a near-frictionless vacuum. In the end, the Ark is more than a ship. It is a sealed world, a closed ecological system, a cultural archive, and a generational home. Its design is the art of balancing a million competing demands: mass versus strength, efficiency versus psychological comfort, redundancy versus simplicity, automation versus human control. It is a city where every brick, every pipe, every wire, and every beam must be perfect, because there are no hardware stores in interstellar space, and failure is not an option. This monumental scale is what separates the Ark from every other spacecraft ever dreamed of. It is not a vehicle you pilot, it is a world you inhabit, a tiny, fragile bubble of biology and technology hurling itself through the cosmic dark, carrying the entire future of humanity within its walls. The challenge is so vast it seems impossible, but so is the goal, survival itself. And perhaps, in learning to build such a thing, we learn how to be better stewards of any world, including our own. The process of solving these problems forces innovation in sustainable living, closed-loop systems, and durable construction that could revolutionize life on Earth long before the Ark ever leaves its construction dock. So the design is not just a blueprint for escape, it is a test, the ultimate final exam for our species' technical and cooperative maturity. Passing that test, figuring out how to build a city in the void, might be the very thing that proves we're ready to become a multi-world species. The scale is the message. It tells us that saving ourselves isn't about a quick fix or a single brilliant invention. It's about a sustained collective commitment to building a future, piece by painstaking piece, in the most unforgiving environment imaginable. That is the weight of the task, the monumental scale of the dream. It starts with a rotating ring and ends with a new chapter for humanity. So we have our Ark, a massive rotating city built in the void, a testament to engineering on a scale we can barely fathom. But here is the immediate glaring problem. How do you move it? You can't just bolt a few rocket engines to the side of a continent-sized structure and hope for the best. The choice of propulsion isn't just a technical detail, it is the single most defining characteristic of the entire mission. It decides how long the journey takes, what destination is even possible, and whether the whole endeavour is a generations-long voyage or a futile crawl. Our familiar chemical rockets, the workhorses that got us to the moon, are utterly useless here. Think about it. A chemical rocket works by burning fuel and oxidizer to create hot gas that shoots out the back, pushing the craft forward. Their efficiency is measured by something called specific impulse, essentially how much push you get per pound of fuel. Chemical rockets have a relatively low specific impulse. To accelerate a mountain of mass like the Ark to even a fraction of the speed needed for an interstellar trip, you would need an amount of fuel so astronomically large it becomes absurd. You would essentially need a fuel tank larger than the Ark itself, and then you would need even more fuel to push that fuel tank. It is a dead end. We need a leap in technology, something far more efficient, something that can run for years, decades, or even centuries. The first serious candidate we have today, at least on the drawing board, is nuclear propulsion. Not the scary atomic bombs exploding behind the ship, but controlled nuclear reactions. There are two main flavours: nuclear thermal propulsion and nuclear electric propulsion. Nuclear thermal propulsion, or NTP, is the closer term technology. It works by using a nuclear reactor to heat up a propellant like liquid hydrogen to extremely high temperatures. The superheated gas then expands and blasts out of a nozzle, just like in a chemical rocket, but much more efficiently because the energy source, the nuclear fission, is separate from the propellant itself. This gives it a specific impulse about twice that of the best chemical engines. It is a powerful, robust system that can be used for fast transits within our solar system. But for the Ark aiming for another star, even NTP starts to show limitations. The propellant, though used more efficiently, is still a consumable mass you have to carry and eventually run out of. The thrust is high, but the efficiency, while better, might not be enough for the truly immense distances between stars. This brings us to nuclear electric propulsion, or NEP. This is a different beast. Here, a nuclear reactor generates electricity, and that electricity is used to power an ion thruster, or a plasma thruster. These engines work by ionizing a gas, like xenon, and then using electric or magnetic fields to accelerate those ions to tremendous speeds out the back. The exhaust velocity is orders of magnitude higher than a chemical rocket, meaning a fantastic specific impulse. You get a huge amount of push for a tiny amount of propellant. The catch? The thrust is very, very low. It is a gentle, continuous push, like a barely perceptible breeze. You could not use it to launch from Earth, but in the frictionless vacuum of space, that gentle push, maintained for years, can build up to incredible speeds. For a massive, patient mission like the Ark, NEP is a compelling option. The reactor provides long-term power for the ship's systems anyway, and the thrusters can run almost indefinitely, slowly and steadily, adding velocity over decades. But is it enough? The journey to even the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, is about 4 light-years away. With NEP, even an optimized system might take tens of thousands of years to get there. That is not a journey. That is an odyssey beyond human comprehension, spanning more time than recorded history. So we are forced to look beyond what we can currently build, towards theoretical concepts that live in the realm of physics papers and hopeful calculations. The most discussed is fusion propulsion. We are trying to build fusion reactors for clean energy on Earth, but harnessing fusion for rockets is another level. The idea is to contain and direct the incredibly energetic plasma from a fusion reaction, like deuterium and tritium fusing into helium, to produce exhaust velocities a significant fraction of the speed of light. A working fusion rocket could theoretically cut the travel time to nearby stars down to centuries or even decades. Concepts like the Daedalus probe, studied by the British Interplanetary Society in the 1970s, outlined a massive ship powered by inertial confinement fusion, where tiny pellets of fuel are blasted with lasers to trigger micro-explosions. The engineering is, to put it mildly, staggering. We cannot yet sustain a net energy gain fusion reaction in a stable, controlled way on Earth, let alone in a compact, reliable spaceship engine that must fire for years. Then there is the Holy Grail, the ultimate in energy density, antimatter propulsion. Antimatter is the mirror image of normal matter. When the two meet, they annihilate in a 100% efficient conversion of mass to energy. A few grams of antimatter could provide the energy equivalent of a space shuttle launch. For a rocket, you would direct the resulting explosion of gamma rays and charged pions through a magnetic nozzle to create thrust. The specific impulse would be off the charts, potentially allowing for relativistic speeds. The problems, however, are similarly monumental. We produce antimatter in minute quantities, atom by atom, in particle accelerators like CERN. It is the most expensive substance ever made. Storing it is a nightmare, as it will annihilate if it touches any normal matter container, requiring complex magnetic bottles. And the energy released is so intensely radioactive that shielding the ship from its own engine exhaust becomes a primary concern. It is a technology centuries away, if ever. Perhaps the most elegant solution is one that carries no fuel at all, the light sail. Not the small solar sails we've tested, but a gigantic ultralight sail, kilometers across, made of reflective material like mylar. Instead of being pushed by the faint pressure of sunlight, this sail would be propelled by a massive laser array stationed in the solar system, perhaps orbiting the sun. A concentrated beam of light from gigantic lasers would strike the sail, transferring momentum and pushing the Ark to a substantial fraction of light speed. The beauty is that the energy source stays at home. The ship carries only the sail and its payload. Once accelerated, the Ark could coast for most of the journey. The challenges are immense. Building a laser system of planetary scale, keeping the beam perfectly focused over light years, and designing a sail that can withstand the tremendous energy without vaporizing. Also, slowing down at the destination is a huge problem, as you cannot easily reverse the process unless you send a laser array ahead of you. Each of these systems dictates a different mission profile. The fusion or antimatter concepts aim for what is called fast transit, where the journey is completed within a human lifetime, avoiding the need for a fully self-sufficient generational ship. The nuclear, electric or light sail concepts often assume a world ship model, where the Ark is a permanent mobile habitat and the journey itself is the mission, lasting for millennia. The choice is fundamental. Do we bet on a propulsion breakthrough that gets us there quickly, or do we design a society that can make the long, slow journey? There is also a critical, often overlooked aspect: durability and maintenance. Whatever engine we choose must operate flawlessly for longer than any machine humans have ever built. It will run for decades continuously. Components will wear out. The system must be designed for in-flight repair. This likely means a high degree of redundancy, with multiple thruster units that can be isolated and serviced. It means advanced robotics that can perform external repairs in the harsh environment of space, handling radioactive components or delicate magnetic coils. The engine room cannot be a place only a few specialists understand. Its operation and basic maintenance must become part of the ship's culture, knowledge passed down through generations. The propulsion system is not just a machine, it is a legacy. The people who turn it on at the beginning of the journey will not be alive to see it turned off. Their children and their children's children will be born, live, and die to the constant, faint hum of its operation. It becomes a heartbeat for the entire vessel. Its reliability is the only thing standing between humanity and the endless static dark. This long-term perspective changes the design philosophy. Raw power might be sacrificed for simplicity and longevity. A slightly slower but utterly dependable nuclear electric system, with multiple fail-safes and easy-to-swap components, might be chosen over a more powerful but temperamental fusion drive. The engine must be so integrated into the ship's structure and power grid that it is almost a natural feature, like a river flowing through a landscape. Furthermore, the propulsion choice locks in the trajectory. A low-thrust system like NEP would likely use a spiral trajectory, slowly moving out from the solar system while constantly accelerating. A high-thrust system might aim for a more direct punch-out. The navigation must be perfect, accounting for gravitational fields of stars and dark matter perturbations over centuries. A tiny error in course correction, magnified over light years, could mean missing the target star system entirely. So the heart of the Ark is this strange, powerful, and patient machine. It is the result of our most ambitious physics and engineering. It represents a bet on a particular future of technology. Do we believe we will master fusion? Can we tame antimatter? Or do we take the slower, steadier path we can almost see from here? The engine defines the character of the mission, a sprint or a marathon, and in that definition it also reflects our own confidence as a species. Choosing to build a generational ship with a slow engine is an admission that the journey is more important than the arrival for those who start it. It is an act of profound faith in future generations. Choosing to wait for a breakthrough for a fast ship is a bet on our own ingenuity to solve the physics problem in time. Both paths are fraught with risk. In the end, the propulsion system is the bridge between our dream of survival and the cold reality of interstellar space. It is the tool that turns a floating city into a ship, and a ship into a legacy. Without the right heart, the Ark is just a tomb. With it, it becomes a vessel carrying the ember of life across an ocean of night, and the steady, patient push of its engines is the sound of that ember being kept alive. It is the most important piece of technology we would ever build, because without it, the grand structure is just a monument, and the great journey never begins. Every discussion about life support, society and ethics hinges on this one question: how do we move? And the answer is not simple, because we're trying to move a world. The engine is chosen, a steady pulse pushing the city ship into the deep. But within those rotating walls, a far more delicate and vital system must operate perfectly every second of every day for centuries: the closed ecological life support system. This is not just machinery, it is the artificial biosphere, a miniature Earth in a bottle. If the propulsion is the heart of the Ark, this system is its lungs, kidneys, digestive tract, and agricultural field all rolled into one infinitely complex interconnected web. The core principle is simple in theory: waste nothing, recycle everything. In practice, it is the hardest engineering and biological challenge of the entire endeavour. On Earth, we take the biosphere for granted. Plants absorb our carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. Microorganisms in soil and water break down our waste into nutrients that feed new growth. The hydrological cycle purifies and redistributes water. The Ark must replicate all these processes within a sealed metal hull, with no resupply from the outside, and with a margin for error that is vanishingly small. The first and most immediate need is air. Thousands of people constantly breathing will consume oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. You cannot just carry tanks of oxygen, you would need impossibly large amounts. So, you need a biological or physiochemical way to regenerate breathable air. Higher plants are the obvious natural choice. Large agricultural zones, illuminated by efficient LED lights tuned to the perfect spectra for photosynthesis, would absorb CO2 and release oxygen. But relying solely on plants is risky. What if a plant disease, a pest outbreak, or a system failure wipes out a significant portion of the crops? The oxygen production would plummet. Therefore, you need backups. This is where systems like the European Space Agency's MELISA project come in. MELISA, which stands for Microecological Life Support System Alternative, is a decades-long research program aiming to create a perfect closed loop. It uses a series of interconnected compartments, essentially mimicking a lake's ecosystem. In one compartment, crew waste and inedible plant matter are broken down by thermophilic or heat-loving bacteria. In others, photosynthetic bacteria like spirulina further process nutrients and contribute to air revitalization. The final compartments are higher plant growth chambers. The goal is a finely tuned ballet of microorganisms and plants, all managed by advanced sensors and control systems. The air itself would also be scrubbed by mechanical systems, using materials like zeolite to absorb CO2, which could then be chemically processed to recover oxygen. The air mix, humidity and trace gas concentrations would be constantly monitored and adjusted. A sudden spike of ethylene from a piece of overripe fruit or a volatile organic compound from a cleaning agent could become a serious problem if not filtered out immediately. Next is water. The saying on the Ark would be, "Every drop is counted." Water would come from initial stores, but primarily from constant recycling. Moisture in the air, from humidity and human breath, would be condensed. All urine, sweat and wash water would be reclaimed. This involves a multi-stage process. Initial filtration removes solids. Then, biological processes, using hardy bacteria in bioreactors, break down organic contaminants. Advanced physical-chemical systems like reverse osmosis and vapor compression distillation would take over, removing salts and inorganic compounds. Finally, perhaps a polishing stage using catalytic reactors or even low-temperature thermal methods would ensure the water is not just safe, but pristine. The resulting pure water would be remineralized for drinking and sent to the agricultural modules. The tolerance for failure here is zero. A major contamination event or a critical filter failure could leave the population without potable water in a matter of days. Redundancy is built into every pipe and pump. Then there is food. This is where the closed loop becomes most visible to the inhabitants. The agricultural zones are the Ark's countryside, but this is not open field farming, it is hyper-efficient, controlled environment agriculture. Plants are grown hydroponically or aeroponically, with their roots misted with a nutrient-rich solution using no soil. This saves immense mass and allows for vertical farming in stacked layers. The lighting is artificial, on precise cycles to maximise growth. The plants are likely genetically optimized for the mission. Dwarf varieties with high nutritional yield, short growth cycles, and perhaps enhanced abilities to absorb specific pollutants from the air. Staple crops would include fast-growing grains like quinoa or amaranth, protein-rich legumes, leafy greens, and vitamin-dense vegetables like sweet potatoes. Fruit trees might be limited due to space and long growth times, replaced by compact berry bushes. The diet would necessarily be mostly vegetarian. Raising traditional livestock is wildly inefficient in terms of space, feed, and waste. Animal protein would be a rare luxury. Instead, protein sources might include cultured meat grown in bioreactors from animal cells or insects. Insects like mealworms or crickets are fantastic converters of plant waste into high-quality protein and fats, and they require relatively little space or water. Managing this food production is a constant, daily effort for a significant portion of the population. It is not just farming, it is ecosystem management. Pollination would be done by hand or by managed populations of small stingless bees. Pest control must be biological, using beneficial insects or sterile insect techniques, as chemical pesticides would poison the closed loop. Every piece of inedible biomass, from plant stalks to food scraps, is not trash, it is feedstock. It goes back into the bioreactors to be broken down by bacteria and fungi into liquid fertilizer and carbon dioxide, completing the cycle. Human solid waste undergoes a similar, though more intensive, process. After initial sterilization, it is processed in anaerobic digesters, where bacteria break it down in the absence of oxygen, producing methane and a nutrient-rich sludge. The methane can be used as a fuel source for auxiliary power or cracked into hydrogen and carbon for other uses. The sludge, after further treatment and safety checks, becomes fertilizer for the crops. This is the ultimate test of mental and cultural adaptation. Knowing that the food on your plate is grown from nutrients that pass through your own body and the bodies of your community. It is the ultimate recycling, a fact both scientifically logical and psychologically challenging. The entire system is a dynamic equilibrium, a constant dance. The amount of carbon locked in plant biomass, in the atmosphere, in the water, and in the crew's bodies must balance. The nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, all the elemental cycles of Earth must be miniaturized and maintained. This requires an army of sensors monitoring millions of data points, pH levels in hydroponic tanks, oxygen output from specific plant chambers, bacterial activity in digesters, trace gas concentrations in the air. This data feeds into a central environmental control computer, likely a sophisticated AI that can adjust lighting, nutrient flow, air circulation and reactor operations in real time to maintain balance. But automation can only go so far. The human crew are the ultimate gardeners of this sealed world. They must understand the system intuitively, be able to diagnose a sick plant batch, troubleshoot a faltering bioreactor, or rebalance nutrient solutions. This knowledge becomes sacred, passed down through generations. The greatest threat to this closed ecosystem is monotony and instability. In nature, biodiversity provides resilience. On the Ark, the species count is necessarily limited. A single pathogen, fungus or bacterium that attacks a key crop species could devastate the food supply. A mutation in the helpful bacterial cultures could render them ineffective or even harmful. Therefore, genetic banks of seeds, plant tissues and microbial strains are kept in cold storage, a library of life to reboot sections if needed. Regular reseeding of agricultural modules with fresh genetic stock from these banks helps maintain health. Psychological acceptance is part of the system's design. The agricultural zones cannot feel just like a factory. They need to feel like a garden, a park, a place of solace. The smell of soil and plants, even if it is just the scent of nutrient solution on roots, is vital for mental well-being. The sound of flowing water in the recycling streams, the sight of green growth, these are not luxuries. They are psychological necessities to counteract the metal and glass of the rest of the habitat. In essence, the closed ecosystem is a form of applied ecology on a deadline. It is Biosphere 2, but without the option to open the doors if things go wrong. Every experiment we have done on Earth in closed systems has shown how difficult it is to achieve stability. Unanticipated things happen. Overgrowth of certain species, depletion of trace elements, build-up of unexpected gases. On the Ark, the first decades would be a period of intense learning and adjustment, even after all the ground-based testing. The crew would become expert ecologists by necessity. This biosphere is also what defines the Ark's carrying capacity. The number of people it can support is not determined by living space alone, but by the balance between food production, oxygen generation and waste processing. It is a hard number, calculated from the total photosynthetic area, the efficiency of the recycling loops, and the energy available for artificial light. Going over this population limit, even by a few dozen people, could slowly but surely collapse the entire system. So life on the Ark is life inside a profoundly intimate cycle. You breathe air that was in the leaves of the plants you tended yesterday. You drink water that has been through the bodies of your ancestors. You eat food grown from what you have returned to the earth. It creates a tangible, immediate connection to the environment that most earthlings have lost. It teaches a brutal, beautiful lesson in sustainability. There is no away to throw things. Everything is here and everything must be used. The success of the mission, therefore, is not just about reaching a star. It is about keeping this fragile artificial bubble of biology alive and in balance during the long dark transit. The engine pushes the hull, but it is this silent, ceaseless work of bacteria, plants and human gardeners that keeps the spark of life burning inside. If the propulsion fails, the ship drifts, but life may continue for a while. If the closed ecosystem fails, everything ends, quickly and irrevocably. It is the ultimate life support and the most vivid demonstration that the Ark is not merely a vessel, but a world unto itself, a tiny, travelling fragment of the biosphere we were born into, now entrusted entirely to our care. This daily, unending maintenance of every breath and every bite is the true mission. The continuous act of survival that defines existence aboard the Ark from launch until the distant end of the journey. It is a perpetual living testament to the cycles of nature, now enclosed in metal and glass, hurtling through the void. Is it a global lottery, giving every human an equal, random chance? This seems fair in principle, but it could result in a ship full of people without the required skills, dooming the mission. Is it a meritocratic competition, based on tests of genetic health, skills, and psychological fitness? This feels more logical for mission success, but it inherently creates an elite class, a best of humanity chosen by some panel of experts, raising questions of bias and the definition of merit. Could it be a combination, with a percentage of slots allocated by lottery and the rest by merit? Or perhaps representatives chosen by each existing nation-state, turning the Ark into a miniature United Nations? Each method carries profound political and moral repercussions. The very act of selection would ignite global social unrest. The knowledge that a lifeboat exists, and that you are almost certainly not on it, could breed resentment, despair, or even violence against the project itself. The ethical weight on the selectors is unimaginable. They would be playing a form of God, deciding whose lineage continues and whose does not, all while claiming to act for the greater good of the species. This is not just logistics, it is a moral catastrophe wrapped in a necessity. Furthermore, the selected population is not a static group. From the moment of launch, demography becomes a controlled science. Births cannot be left entirely to personal choice. The population must remain stable, hovering right at the carrying capacity. This means a strict collective management of reproduction. Couples might need permission or be entered into a scheduling system to have a child, waiting for a slot to open when someone dies. This turns the most intimate human act into a regulated community resource. Conversely, in the event of an unexpected population decline, incentives or even mandates to have children might be necessary. The traditional family structure might evolve or be managed by social policy. Aging and death are also integrated into the plan. The Ark likely cannot support a large population of elderly, non-working individuals for extended periods, as their care consumes resources without contributing to system maintenance. This could lead to difficult, culturally embedded approaches to end-of-life care, or a social expectation of working until one is physically unable, with a swift decline thereafter. The first generation, the founders, will carry the direct memory of Earth. They will have volunteered for this, knowing the terms. But their children, the first native generation, will be born into this regulated existence. They will know no other reality. Their right to have children will be framed not as a personal liberty, but as a communal responsibility, a permit granted for the health of the gene pool and the stability of the life support loops. This foundational population, therefore, is not just a list of names, it is a seed. A seed contains within it the genetic blueprint for the entire future of the plant, but also requires the right environment to grow. The Ark provides the environment, but the seed's composition determines everything that follows: health, adaptability, and resilience. The selection is an act of hope and of heartbreaking triage. It assumes that preserving a slice of humanity is better than losing it all, even if that slice cannot be perfectly representative or chosen without injustice. The people who board will carry not only their skills and genes, but also the immense psychological burden of being the chosen ones. They will be the heirs to all of Earth's legacy, and the parents of a new spacefaring lineage. Their success depends on the cold calculus of genetics and skills, but their humanity depends on how they process and transcend the impossible circumstance of their selection. They must build a society from scratch, knowing they were picked from billions, and find a way to make that society feel not like a privileged Ark, but like a home for all of humanity that they now embody. The process is brutal, but its goal is the most profound one possible: to ensure that somewhere, in the vast dark, a conversation continues, a story is still told, and a child looks up at an artificial sun and calls it their own. That child's existence, and the existence of all who follow, hinges on the impossible choices made centuries before, on the criteria debated in conference halls, on a world they will never know, about who was worthy or lucky or necessary enough to take that first irreversible step away from the cradle. The selection is the moment theory becomes painfully, beautifully human. It is the bridge between our dream of survival and the living, breathing, arguing, loving, and struggling reality of the people who will have to make that dream endure, one generation at a time, in a city sailing the stars. Every other system on the Ark serves this population. The engines push them, the shields protect them, the farms feed them, but they, in their diversity and their complexity, are the mission. Choosing them is the first and most definitive act of building the future, and it is an act shrouded in the shadow of all that must be left behind. It is a practical necessity wrapped in an eternal ethical question, and the answer, whatever it is, will define the soul of the new humanity for all its days to come. The process is as important as the result because the trauma and the triumph of selection will become part of the colony's foundational myth, a story told and retold about how they came to be and why they must endure. This burden, carried in the collective memory, is the true weight of the Ark, heavier than any shield or engine, and it is a weight placed squarely on the shoulders of a few thousand souls chosen from all the world. Their journey begins long before launch, in the heartbreak and hope of a planet saying a selective and perhaps final goodbye to a part of itself. So the selection is done, the chosen few are aboard, and the doors have sealed. Now, the real experiment begins. We have a carefully curated gene pool and a complete set of technical skills, but we've placed this group inside a pressurized can, flung it into the void with no possibility of return, and asked them to not just survive, but to build a stable society for generations. The psychological and social challenges here are arguably greater than any engineering problem. You can design a perfect water recycler, but you cannot design a perfect human heart or predict the drift of community soul over centuries. The first and most pervasive pressure is the reality of confinement and surveillance. There is no outside. Every square meter is designed, every resource monitored. The air you breathe is measured. The water you use is tracked. Your food intake is part of a balance sheet. This constant, omnipresent awareness of being a component in a life support system can be oppressive. Privacy becomes a rare commodity, perhaps allocated like water. Your arguments, your moods, your relationships, all play out in a community too small to avoid anyone. There are no wildernesses to escape to, no quiet corners of the world to get lost in. This lack of anonymity and personal space is a fundamental stressor that every individual must learn to manage, and some will not cope. Then there is the monotony, the sheer grinding sameness of the environment. While the view outside the viewports is a breathtaking starfield, the interior will be largely unchanging. The same artificial sun cycle, the same corridors, the same farms, the same faces. The human mind craves novelty, and on a generation ship, novelty is a scarce resource. This can lead to a condition often called long-duration mission fatigue or a deep existential boredom. It is not just being bored for an afternoon, it is the realization that your entire life, and your children's lives, will be spent within the same metal walls, pursuing the same maintenance tasks, with the same ultimate goal decades or centuries away. Combating this requires deliberate, structured efforts to create variety. Cultural events, new artistic movements, intellectual challenges, virtual reality experiences that simulate other worlds, and perhaps even the design of interior spaces that can be physically reconfigured to create a sense of change. Social dynamics in such a pressure cooker are volatile. Small grievances without the release valve of physical separation can fester into deep conflicts. Groupthink could become dangerous, suppressing innovation. Alternatively, factions could form based on professional specializations, original Earth cultures, or philosophical disagreements about the mission itself. The agricultural crew might feel pitted against the engineering team over resource allocation. Those who maintain the ship's systems might develop a sense of superiority over those in softer roles like teaching or art, viewing them as less essential, even though psychology tells us those roles are vital for stability. Managing these interpersonal and intergroup conflicts is a continuous task for whatever governance system emerges. Speaking of governance, what form does it take? This is not a democracy as we know it, nor can it be a pure dictatorship. The system must be efficient enough to make quick technical decisions in a crisis, like rerouting power from residential sectors to a failing farm module. but it must also be perceived as legitimate and fair by the populace to prevent rebellion. It might start as a meritocratic technocracy, where leaders are chosen from among the most senior and respected experts in each critical field, forming a ruling council. But as generations pass, the legitimacy of rule by technical expertise alone might wane, especially among those born into the ship who did not choose this hierarchy. There could be a drift toward a more representative democracy, or perhaps a unique hybrid model. The constitution of the Ark would be a living document, but one that cannot allow for total upheaval. A failed political experiment could doom everyone. There might be a set of unchangeable mission laws hard-coded into the central computer, ensuring the core objectives of population control, resource management, and ship integrity are never voted away. Justice is another puzzle. What are the consequences for crimes in a society that cannot afford prisons? Exile is impossible. Long-term incarceration consumes resources and a person's productive potential. Punishments would likely be rehabilitative and restorative, focusing on community service and psychological treatment. For the most severe, unmanageable threats to the ship, the ultimate grim sanction might be revocation of reproductive rights, or even, in whispers no one likes to voice, programmed euthanasia. This is the darkest corner of shipboard society, where the needs of the many absolutely outweigh the rights of the one. Beyond governance, the society must actively build a new culture. The founders will cling to Earth traditions, but their grandchildren will know Earth only as stories and archives. A unique shipboard culture will emerge, blending inherited elements with new necessities. Language will evolve, with slang and technical jargon mixing into a distinct dialect. New art forms will arise, perhaps using light, sound and recycled materials in ways we cannot imagine. Music would be crucial. History and science will be taught, but the central narrative will become the mission itself. The story of the founding, the great journey, the destination. This narrative is the glue that holds society together, providing a shared purpose. Rituals will develop around shipboard events, the passing of a generation, the birth of the 1,000th native-born child, the anniversary of launch, the crossing of some astronomical milestone. Religion might transform, with new interpretations focusing on the sanctity of the closed ecosystem or the divinity of the cosmic journey. The most profound psychological shift will be for the generations born in space, the so-called natives. Their perception of reality is fundamentally different. Earth is a mythic homeland, a picture in a storybook. Their world is the ship. Their sky is the ceiling of the cylinder. Trees, if they have any, are carefully curated specimens in a park, not a sprawling forest. Their sense of scale is bounded by the hull. They may have no innate fear of falling, only of drifting. They might develop a completely different relationship with technology, seeing the ship's AI not as a tool, but as a guardian spirit or a familial entity. Their psychology is the great unknown. Will they see the mission as a glorious purpose or a prison sentence they were born into? A deep-seated wanderlust, a craving for open spaces and real horizons, could manifest as a profound psychological malady for which there is no cure. Conversely, they might develop a serene, deep connection to their vessel, a sense of being part of a single, living organism, and view the idea of planets as chaotic, dangerous, and alien. Their very identity will be Homo sapiens **, the star human, and the gap between them and their Earth ancestor founders will widen with each passing decade. Maintaining mental health across all these generations requires constant, proactive effort. Access to therapists, counsellors, and community support is as vital as access to the medical bay. Activities that promote flow states like complex crafts, music, programming, or intensive study are necessary. The design of social spaces, from quiet alcoves to bustling plazas, must facilitate both community and solitude. The work itself, if felt as meaningful contribution rather than mere drudgery, provides a key psychological anchor. Everyone must feel they are a vital part of keeping the whole alive. In the end, the society on the Ark is an exercise in extreme interdependence. Your neighbour's mental health is your business, because their breakdown could affect the systems you rely on. The community's stability is everyone's personal safety. This could foster an incredible ethic of mutual care and collectivism, a utopia of shared purpose. Or it could breed resentment, passive aggression, and hidden tensions that simmer for generations before exploding. The success of the human element hinges not on the perfection of the selection, but on the adaptability of the culture that grows from it. It must be a culture that values emotional intelligence as highly as technical skill, that has mechanisms for airing grievances and healing rifts, and that can find joy and meaning not in the destination, but in the daily act of sustaining life together on the journey. The ship can withstand micrometeoroids and radiation, but it may be most vulnerable to a simple slow decay of hope, a social entropy that no shield can block. Therefore, the most critical system aboard is not made of pipes or wires, but of stories, traditions, laws, and the unspoken bonds between people who share the most profound isolation in history. Keeping that system functional is the endless, invisible work of every generation, and it is the true test of whether humanity is capable of not just building starships, but of deserving them. The voyage is not just through space, but through the potential of the human spirit under eternal constraint. The society that emerges will be a mirror, reflecting both our deepest needs for community and our darkest fears of confinement, and what we see in that mirror will tell us more about ourselves than any telescope ever could. The Ark's hull protects the body, but its culture protects the mind, and that is the most fragile and precious cargo of all. This social experiment, running in parallel to the physical journey, will determine if the species that arrives at a new star is one that we would recognise, and more importantly, one that can finally step out of the Ark and, without repeating the old mistakes, build something new under an alien sun. The challenge is to remain human in the fullest, most compassionate and creative sense, while living in an environment that is anything but. The society aboard the Ark is a living, evolving entity, shaping its own customs and perspectives as it travels. But it carries within it, like a fossil record or a sacred text, the memory of the world it left behind. This leads to a profound and deeply philosophical task that must be completed before launch. What do we take? With storage space at an absolute premium, the curation of humanity's legacy becomes an act of triage as consequential as the selection of the people themselves. We are not just packing for a trip, we are deciding what of our 10,000-year recorded history is essential enough to deserve a future. This is not about saving everything, it is about saving the right things to give our descendants the tools to understand who they were and the foundations to build who they will become. The first and most practical layer is the sum total of human technical and scientific knowledge. This is the non-negotiable core. The Ark's library must contain the complete principles of mathematics, physics, chemistry and biology. It needs engineering manuals for everything from basic metallurgy to semiconductor fabrication. It needs medical texts covering anatomy, surgery, pharmacology and genetics. It needs the blueprints for its own systems, down to the last bolt, and the principles behind them so future generations can repair, modify, or even rebuild. This information is compactly stored in digital form, but the real challenge is ensuring it remains accessible and understandable over centuries. File formats become obsolete, storage media decays. The solution is likely multiple redundant systems, incredibly durable physical media like etched silicon discs or analog optical crystals, paired with constantly updated emulation software and the complete technical specifications to build a computer from scratch to read it all. The archive must be self-documenting, containing within it the instructions to unlock itself. Yet knowledge is more than schematics, it is context, which brings us to history. We cannot send the entirety of human history, every battle, every king, every election. So what narrative do we send? A simple, triumphant timeline of progress would be a lie. A catalogue of only our wars and follies would be a crippling burden. The archive must strive for a balanced, multi-perspective history. It should include primary sources, speeches, letters, diaries from different cultures and eras, showing the complexity of human motives. It should document not just the rise of civilizations, but their collapse, teaching lessons about resource management, social inequality, and environmental stewardship. The founding of democracies, the horrors of totalitarianism, the abolition of slavery, the struggle for rights. These are not just stories. They are case studies in social organisation, warnings and guides for the society being born on the Ark. The choice of what events are core and which are footnotes will inevitably reflect the biases of the curators, likely a panel of historians, scientists and philosophers from across Earth. Their debates would be fierce. How much weight to give Eastern versus Western history? How to represent controversial figures? The very act of curation is a powerful statement of values from a dying world to its heirs. Then comes culture, the soul of the species. Which works of art, literature and music make the cut? Again, digital storage allows for a vast collection, but the selection is still agonizing. Do you include every note Beethoven ever wrote? Probably. But what about the complete filmography of a popular 21st century director? Likely not. The goal is diversity of human expression. The archive would contain visual art from cave paintings to digital installations, showcasing techniques and visions across millennia. Literature would span epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh and Homer's Odyssey through Shakespeare, to seminal novels from every continent, preserving not just stories but the evolution of language and thought. Music would range from ancient folk traditions to classical symphonies to key popular genres, preserving the emotional language of humanity. The curators must also decide on religion and philosophy. Do they include sacred texts like the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the teachings of Buddha? Almost certainly, as these are foundational to the ethical and metaphysical thinking of billions of people. But they would be presented as historical and cultural documents, part of humanity's search for meaning, likely alongside secular philosophical works from Plato to contemporary thinkers. The aim is not to proselytize, but to provide the tools for spiritual and philosophical inquiry. Language itself is a critical issue. The Ark will have its own working language, perhaps a simplified global language like English, or a constructed language like Esperanto for daily operation. But the linguistic legacy must be preserved. The archive would include comprehensive databases of the world's major languages, their grammars, and key literature, so that a future generation could, if they wished, learn Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, or Swahili, and through that language access a unique worldview. The loss of language is the loss of a unique way of seeing the universe. Perhaps the most poignant category is the mundane, the everyday life of Earth. High-resolution videos of forests, oceans, deserts and cities. The sounds of rain, birdsong, a busy market, a quiet conversation, recipes for grandmother's pie, instructions for games like soccer or chess, the smell of soil after rain captured in a descriptive paragraph. This sensory archive is vital to combat the abstraction of Earth for the ship-borne generations. It answers the question, what was it like? Not just, what did they know? It grounds the technical and historical data in the lived sensory experience of a planet. All this data is stored, but how is it presented and accessed? It cannot be a dusty digital library no one visits. It must be integrated into the Ark's education system and cultural life. Children might learn history through immersive virtual reality experiences of key events. Artists might study Renaissance painting techniques directly from scanned masterpieces. Musicians might compose new works inspired by a fusion of archived Indonesian gamelan and 20th century jazz. The legacy should be a living resource, not a mausoleum. This leads to the greatest risk, distortion or loss. Over generations, without the living context of Earth, meanings can shift. A historical event might be misinterpreted. A religious text might be taken literally in a way its original authors never intended. A work of satire might be read as serious doctrine. The culture of the Ark itself will inevitably filter how the legacy is perceived. To mitigate this, the archive would need extensive metadata and commentary, explaining context, controversies, and multiple interpretations where they exist. It is a time capsule with its own instruction manual. Finally, there is the unspoken question of what to leave out. What do we consciously exclude? Do we include detailed records of weapons of mass destruction, of horrific torture techniques, of propaganda methods? There is an argument for including even the darkest knowledge, both as a warning and because suppressing information has its own dangers. Yet, providing a step-by-step guide to building a nuclear weapon might be an unnecessary risk. The curators must walk a line between historical honesty and prudent responsibility. In the end, the legacy carried by the Ark is a mirror held up to the species at the moment of its possible departure. It says, this is what we thought was beautiful. This is what we thought was true. This is where we succeeded, and this is where we failed. Use it wisely. It is an act of immense hope that the children of the void will still care about the songs and stories of a world they have never seen. And it is an act of humility, acknowledging that we cannot send all of ourselves, only a carefully chosen seed. That seed, however, contains the blueprint not just for rebuilding a civilization, but for understanding the poignant, creative, tragic, and magnificent thing that it is to be human. The Ark itself becomes the greatest artifact, a vessel carrying the concentrated essence of a planet. Its legacy library is the soul of that artifact, the whisper of Earth that will echo through the corridors for all the long journey, reminding everyone from the first founder to the child born 1,000 years later that they are part of a story that began under a different sun, and that it is now their sacred duty to ensure that story continues, evolves, and perhaps, one day, finds a new and worthy chapter under an alien sky. The selection of this legacy is perhaps the final conversation Earth has with its future. It is a conversation where every book, every equation, every song is a word, and the entire collection is a last loving letter into the dark. All that legacy, all that hope, is packed into the ship with a purpose, to go somewhere. But where? The destination is not a simple choice. It is a complex equation balancing distance, time, habitability, and the very nature of the Ark itself. We are not just picking a spot on a map, we are deciding the future environment of our species. The first category of destinations is within our own solar system. This seems the most achievable. Targets like Mars, or the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, Europa, Callisto, Titan, or Enceladus, are within reach using propulsion technology we can almost grasp, like advanced nuclear thermal or nuclear electric engines. A journey to Mars might take months, to the outer moons several years. This is a timescale the founding generation would experience. But do these places offer true salvation? Mars is a cold, radiation-blasted desert with a thin atmosphere. Terraforming it is a project spanning millennia, requiring technologies to thicken the atmosphere, heat the planet, and create a magnetosphere. The Ark would not be a lifeboat in this scenario. It would be a construction base, and its passengers would be pioneers engaged in the slow, brutal work of planet building. The moons offer other possibilities. Europa has a vast subsurface ocean under an ice shell, potentially harbouring simple life. Settling there would mean living in habitats under the ice, protected from radiation but utterly dependent on technology for light, heat and food. Titan has a thick atmosphere and liquid methane lakes, but is freezing cold and lacks breathable air. These are not ready-made homes, they're extreme frontier outposts. Choosing a solar system destination means the Ark remains tethered to the fate of our sun. If the threat is a dying sun, then Mars and Europa will be consumed just as Earth will. If the threat is a gamma-ray burst or a nearby supernova, the entire solar system might be sterilized. So for a true insurance policy against existential threats, we must look beyond. This leads to the second and most daunting category, interstellar destinations. This means travelling to an exoplanet orbiting another star. The nearest potentially habitable candidate is Proxima Centauri b, orbiting the red dwarf star Proxima Centauri, just over 4 light-years away. Others in the habitable zone of their stars include planets in the TRAPPIST-1 system, about 40 light-years away. The distances are incomprehensibly vast. With current conceptual technology like a massive fusion rocket or a laser-pushed light sail, a one-way trip to Proxima Centauri could take anywhere from several centuries to several thousand years. This transforms the mission entirely. The Ark is no longer a ship on a voyage, it becomes a world ship, a permanent mobile habitat. The destination is a goal so distant it might only be relevant to the descendants of the people who left. This choice fundamentally changes the society aboard, as discussed earlier. But let's say we commit to an interstellar journey. How do we choose which star? Red dwarf stars like Proxima Centauri are the most common into the galaxy, and their habitable zones are very close in, meaning planets there are likely tidally locked, with one side in permanent day and the other in permanent night. They're also prone to violent stellar flares that could bathe planets in deadly radiation. More sun-like stars, G-type stars, are rarer and farther away. The choice involves astrophysics. We need a stable, long-lived star. It involves planetary science. We need a planet within the habitable zone, but habitable zone only means liquid water could exist. The planet could be a desolate rock with a thin atmosphere, or a hellish greenhouse like Venus. We would need extensive data from telescopes to characterize the atmosphere, looking for signs of oxygen, water vapor, and a stable climate. This data is what missions like the James Webb Space Telescope are starting to collect. but to be certain, we would need an interstellar probe sent ahead, a pathfinder that could send data back before the Ark ever departs. The journey itself dictates the propulsion, and the propulsion dictates the journey time. A slow nuclear electric arc might take tens of thousands of years to reach even the nearest stars. This introduces the concept of flight dynamics on a galactic scale. The ship might use gravity assists from the gas giants to slingshot out of the solar system, but once in interstellar space its course is largely set. It would have to account for the movement of the target star itself, which is orbiting the galactic centre. You're not aiming at where the star is now, but where it will be in 20,000 years. The navigation computers must calculate this with insane precision. There is also the grim possibility that by the time the Ark arrives, the situation has changed. The promising exoplanet might have been hit by a giant asteroid, suffered a runaway greenhouse effect, or be otherwise uninhabitable. Therefore, a wise mission profile might not target a single planet, but a promising star system with multiple potential bodies, planets and moons, to increase the odds of finding a suitable home. The Ark would then enter orbit around that star and become a base for detailed exploration using smaller, faster probes. This leads to the final critical phase, arrival and settlement. After centuries or millennia of flight, the Ark decelerates, a process requiring as much energy and time as acceleration, and enters the target system. The crew, now generations removed from Earth, must then reconnoitre. They would send probes to the candidate planets to get ground truth data. Assuming a suitable planet is found, the next challenge is landing. The Ark itself, a massive, fragile, rotating structure, almost certainly cannot land on a planetary surface. It would remain in orbit as a permanent space station, a hub. Landing would require specialised shuttles, carried in pieces or built during the voyage, to ferry people and equipment down. The planet might be marginally habitable, requiring immediate construction of pressurised habitats. It might have toxic soil or an unbreathable atmosphere. The settlers would be starting from scratch, but with one immense advantage: the Ark in orbit. It is their factory, their power station, their safe haven. The process of terraforming even a marginally suitable planet would begin, a project that could take further centuries, guided by the descendants of the original crew. An alternative, darker possibility is that no suitable planet is found. The star system might be barren. In that case, the Ark simply continues. It becomes a nomadic world, perhaps mining asteroids in the new system for resources to repair itself, and then moving on to the next candidate star. The mission becomes an endless search, and the Ark becomes the only home humanity will ever know again. So, the destination is not a guarantee. It is a best guess, a hopeful target. The journey is the certainty. This is why the design of the Ark as a closed, self-sufficient world is paramount. It must be capable of sustaining life indefinitely, whether the destination is a green paradise or a cosmic disappointment. The choice of destination, therefore, is less about finding a perfect Earth 2.0 and more about finding a stable stellar neighbourhood where the Ark can safely park and begin the next phase of its existence, whether that is planet-based or not. It is a beacon, a direction to swim towards in the ocean of night. The act of choosing a destination is an act of faith in the future, a declaration that we believe there is a place for us out there, even if we ourselves will never feel its sun on our faces. It completes the arc of the mission, from the threat that pushes us away to the vessel that carries us, to the hope that pulls us forward. That hope, crystallized into a set of celestial coordinates, is the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to the question of why go through all this. Because out there, somewhere, is a place where the story can continue, and even if it takes 100 generations to get there, the very fact that we pointed our ship in that direction is a triumph of the human spirit over the void. The destination is the dream that fuels the generations of gardeners, engineers, teachers and children who will live and die between the stars, keeping the flame alive for a dawn they will never see, on a world they can only imagine, guided by the legacy of a home they have never known. It is the ultimate long-term investment, made with the currency of lives and time, for a return that is nothing less than eternity. The journey is long, the destination a distant promise. And within the rotating city, life continues. Children are born. This is not an incidental fact. It is the central premise of a generational voyage. These children, The first true natives of the stars will be unlike any humans who've ever lived. Their development, their biology, their very perception of reality will be shaped by the Ark in ways that may make them strangers to their own ancestors. The ship is not just a vessel for them, it is their womb, their world, and the only ecosystem their species will have ever known. From their first breath, their bodies will adapt to an environment engineered down to the last detail. The most immediate factor is gravity. The Ark generates artificial gravity through rotation, but for engineering and safety reasons it might be set at a value lower than Earth's 1G. Perhaps it is 0.85 G or 0.9 G. To an adult from Earth, this feels like a slight, pleasant lightness. To a child whose skeleton and musculature form under this constant pull, it becomes their normal. Their bones may develop with slightly less density. Their muscles, particularly the anti-gravity muscles of the back and legs, might not need to be as robust. Their cardiovascular system will calibrate itself to pump blood against a weaker force. This has a profound consequence. For these children, Earth gravity would feel like a crushing heavy weight. A trip to the destination planet, if it has a surface gravity even equal to Earth's, could be physically debilitating, requiring them to undergo intense physical therapy or even powered exoskeletons to move. They are being evolutionarily optimized for life aboard the ship, not for planetary surfaces. This could create a permanent divide between the space-adapted natives and any future colonists who must live on a planet. The Ark might always remain their true home, with planets being hostile environments they visit only with technological aid. Another pervasive factor is radiation. Despite meters of shielding, the Ark is not Earth. A low, persistent background of cosmic radiation will seep through. On Earth, our planet's magnetic field and atmosphere reduce this to negligible levels for human biology. On the Ark, even the small residual dose is higher. Over a single lifetime, the increased cancer risk is managed with medical screening and advanced treatments. But over multiple generations, the subtle effects of this radiation on DNA could accumulate. Natural selection aboard the Ark would very slowly favour genetic lineages that are more resistant to radiation damage or better at DNA repair. This is not a dramatic mutation visible in a generation. It is a slow, statistical drift in the gene pool. Furthermore, in the confined environment, certain genetic traits might become more common simply by chance, a process called genetic drift. The founder effect of the initial small population amplifies this. So biologically, the population will slowly diverge from the Earth baseline. Their sensory world is also uniquely constructed. They will have never felt unfiltered sunlight on their skin or a natural breeze. The sun is an array of LEDs on a ceiling. The sky is a curved vista of interior landscape or a screen showing a simulated terrestrial sky. Their day-night cycle is artificially set, perhaps to a 24-hour rhythm to maintain the circadian legacy of Earth, but it could be adjusted to anything. The sounds are the constant low hum of life support, the whisper of air circulators, the occasional chime of a system alert. The smell is recycled, clean, a blend of ozone from electrical systems, the scent of hydroponic nutrients, and the mild odour of a closely managed biosphere. Their sense of nature is the park module, a beautiful but entirely designed garden. This will shape their psychology and their art. Their dreams might be of vast, confusing open spaces, or of incomprehensible planetary landscapes drawn from storybooks. Their relationship with technology is innate, seamless. They will likely not see the ship's systems as separate from their world. The AI that manages the environment might be perceived more as a guardian spirit or a fundamental force of nature than as a tool. The concept of weather is something that happens in the atmospheric processes, not something that exists independently. This leads to the most profound shift, cultural and personal identity. For the founders, Earth is home, a place of memory and loss. For their children, Earth is history, mythology, a place in stories. For their grandchildren, it is a distant concept, like Atlantis is to us. Their identity is ship-bound. They are the people of the asterisk starship Nautilus Asterisk, or whatever it is named. Their heroes are not terrestrial explorers or earthbound leaders, but perhaps the great engineers who keep the systems running, or the legendary first captain. Their sense of purpose is inextricably linked to the mission's success, but their definition of success might change. Is the goal to reach the destination, or is the goal to preserve the ship and its culture? To a generation born midway through a 1,000-year journey, the destination is as abstract as the beginning. Their life's work is the maintenance of the world they live in. Their education focuses on the skills needed for that maintenance: ecology, engineering, medicine, and social management. History is taught, but it is the history of the mission and the curated legacy of Earth. Their language will evolve. Technical terms from shipboard systems will bleed into everyday speech. Words for Earth-specific phenomena, like horse or ocean, might become archaic, known only from texts. New words will emerge for ship-specific concepts. Social structures will adapt to the needs of the vessel. The strict management of reproduction and resources will shape family models and personal relationships. Concepts of ownership are likely minimal. What can you own in a world where every object is part of a shared survival system? Status may be derived from skill, wisdom, or contribution to the community's well-being, not from material accumulation. Over many generations, these cultural and biological shifts could lead to the emergence of what some have called asterisk Homo sapiens astra, star human. This is not a sudden speciation, but a gradual divergence. They might be slightly taller and leaner in lower gravity. Their bones might be more fragile by Earth standards, but perfectly adapted to their own. Their immune systems, developed in the meticulously clean and controlled biosphere of the ship, might be ill-equipped for the robust, dirty microbiome of a living planet, making them vulnerable to alien infections. Their cultural mindset is fundamentally that of a closed-system dweller, cautious, interdependent, valuing stability and predictability over risk and expansion. This creates a fascinating paradox for the mission's climax. When the Ark finally arrives at its target star system, the generation that faces the new world may be the least physically and psychologically suited to colonize it. They might prefer to remain in the safe, known environment of the orbiting Ark, using robots and perhaps a few brave volunteers to explore the planetary surface. The Ark, intended as a lifeboat to a new world, might instead become the permanent home, with the planet serving as a resource base. The children of the Ark are the ultimate embodiment of the mission's ambition and its tragedy. They are born to continue a journey they did not choose, in a world built by ancestors they will never meet, for a goal that may not benefit them directly. Their lives are given meaning by the structure of the ship itself. Yet, in their adaptation, they represent humanity's incredible plasticity. They prove that we can become citizens of the void, that we can remake our biology and culture to fit a new reality. They are the living bridge between the earthbound past and whatever future awaits among the stars. Their very existence is a triumph of long-term thinking, and their well-being is the ultimate measure of the Ark's success. Keeping them healthy, sane, and hopeful across centuries is the real mission, far more than the simple act of crossing space. The ship is their womb, but they, in turn, are the soul of the ship, the consciousness that gives purpose to all that metal and circuitry. They are the human answer to the cosmic silence, a message not in a bottle but in a living, breathing, evolving culture sailing on. And whether they ever set foot on an alien world or not, they have already become something new. The first generation of humans for whom the stars are not distant points of light, but the permanent ceiling of their home, and the journey itself is their inheritance. Their adaptation is the story, a story written not in genes alone, but in the daily choices of a society learning what it means to be human when the definition of world has shrunk to the size of a city, and the horizon is forever curved. This is the final, beautiful, and melancholy truth of the generational arc. It saves humanity by changing it irrevocably into something that can survive the void, even if that means leaving part of our earthly selves behind. The first cry of a child born in that rotating habitat is the sound of the future being born, a future that belongs entirely to them and to the long, long night they will call home. The profound adaptation of generations born in transit reveals the ultimate purpose of the Ark, but it forces us back to a very earthly, very immediate question. How do we pay for it? The vision is grand, but the price tag is astronomical in the most literal sense. We are not funding a moon landing or a space station. We are funding the construction of a mobile continent in space, a project spanning more than a century. The costs are so vast they defy our current economic frameworks, raising not just practical issues of funding but deep ethical dilemmas about our priorities as a species. Let's talk scale first. Constructing the International Space Station, a habitable volume smaller than a 6-bedroom house, cost around $150 billion when accounting for all international contributions, shuttle flights, and decades of development. The Ark is orders of magnitude larger and infinitely more complex. We are talking about creating a sealed biosphere, developing entirely new propulsion systems, mining asteroids or lunar material, and building orbital infrastructure on an industrial scale. Conservative estimates from economists and aerospace engineers suggest a multi-century project like this would consume a significant single-digit percentage of global GDP every year for over 100 years. To put it in relatable terms, it would be like financing the combined costs of World War II, the Apollo program, and the entire global infrastructure for renewable energy, but sustained for the lifespan of several human generations. This is not something a single nation, or even a traditional consortium of nations, can easily bankroll. It would require a fundamental reallocation of human productive capacity. So, who writes the check? There are three primary models, each with massive implications. The first is the state-led model, a modern-day Apollo program, but on a global scale. This would require unprecedented international cooperation, perhaps under a reformed United Nations framework with real budgetary power. Nations would contribute a percentage of their GDP or tax revenue into a common fund. The political hurdles are immense. Getting nations with conflicting interests, different economic strengths, and varying domestic needs to agree to such a long-term financial commitment is a Herculean diplomatic task. It would require a level of trust and shared purpose that has eluded us throughout history. The second model is private funding, driven by ultra-wealthy individuals or corporate consortia. We see the seeds of this today with billionaires funding space exploration companies. A single visionary trillionaire or a coalition of the world's wealthiest people could, in theory, bankroll the early stages. This model is faster and avoids political gridlock, but it comes with its own severe problems. It essentially puts the future of the species in the hands of a few unelected individuals. Their motives, their vision for who should be saved and what the mission's goals are, would dominate. It could create a scenario where the Ark is less a communal lifeboat and more a privately owned vessel with all the dystopian implications that carries. The third, and perhaps most realistic model, is a hybrid public-private partnership. Governments provide the long-term stability, legal frameworks, and foundational research, while private entities handle construction, innovation, and operational efficiency. Funding could come from sovereign wealth funds, global bonds for interstellar development, or even a small tax on certain international financial transactions. But this still doesn't solve the core ethical dilemma. The money, no matter where it comes from, represents resources, materials, energy, and most importantly, human labour and intellect. Allocating those resources to a lifeboat for a far future catastrophe means they are not being used to solve problems here and now. Can we justify spending trillions on a starship while poverty, disease, climate change adaptation and conflict still plague billions on Earth? This is the central moral conflict of the Ark. Critics would call it the ultimate expression of escapism, a selfish project for a technocratic elite that gives up on fixing our current world. Proponents argue it is the ultimate insurance policy, and that the technological spin-offs alone would revolutionise life on Earth. They point to how the Apollo program gave us integrated circuits, advanced materials, and a new perspective on our planet. The Ark project would force breakthroughs in fusion energy, closed-loop recycling, sustainable agriculture, and medicine that could directly address Earth's crises. In this view, the Ark isn't a diversion of resources. It is a catalyst for a new industrial and ecological revolution that benefits everyone. This argument leads to a potential economic game-changer in situ resource utilisation. The only way to make the Ark financially feasible is to not launch everything from Earth. The construction must use space resources. This means developing the technology to mine water and metals from asteroids, to process regolith on the Moon into construction materials, and to build automated factories in space. This creates a potential new economic model. The Ark project could pay for itself by kick-starting the space economy. The technologies to mine an asteroid for Ark construction could also be used to bring rare metals and platinum group elements back to Earth, creating wealth. The infrastructure built for the Ark, orbital shipyards, refueling depots, power satellites, would lower the cost of all future space activities. So the funding might not be a pure sinkhole. It could be the biggest infrastructure investment in history, creating a new economic sector that eventually pays dividends. However, this introduces another risk: conflict over those very space resources. If a single entity controls the asteroid mining operations that fund the Ark, they wield enormous power. The project could trigger a new form of space-based colonialism, with nations or corporations fighting over the richest celestial bodies. The Ark, intended to unite humanity, could instead become a source of new division. Ultimately, the funding question is a test. It tests our ability to think and cooperate across generations. It tests our values. Are we a species that only responds to immediate threats, or can we collectively invest in a future so distant we will never see it? The money is just a symbol for that commitment. Finding the funds requires building a global consensus that humanity as a collective project is worth preserving, and that this preservation is a shared responsibility that transcends current political borders and short-term economic cycles. It may require us to invent new forms of finance, new types of long-term bonds that mature in 100 years, bought by grandparents for grandchildren they will never meet. It may require a cultural shift where contributions to the Ark are seen as a universal civic duty, like a tax for species survival. If we fail to solve the funding, the Ark remains a dream. Its impossibility is not in the physics, but in our politics and our economics. The story of the Ark, therefore, is not just a story of engineering. It is a story of whether we can organise ourselves as a planet to achieve something truly grand. The rocket equation is solvable. The closed ecosystem is a tough but conceivable biological challenge. But the human equation, the one involving greed, short-sightedness, nationalism and inequality, may be the hardest equation of all to solve. The Ark's price tag is a mirror, showing us the cost of our own survival and asking if we are willing as a global civilization to pay it. The conversation about funding forces us to define what we value most: immediate comfort in the status quo, or the audacious and expensive and glorious project of ensuring that one day a child born under an alien sun can look back and wonder at the generations that sacrificed to make their existence possible. That might be the most valuable return on investment in the history of life. The staggering cost forces a brutal follow-up question. Even if we find the money, do we have the time? The Ark project exists in a race against not one but two clocks, and they tick at wildly different speeds. One clock measures our technological and construction tempo, slow, plodding count of decades and centuries. The other clock measures the arrival of the very threats the Ark is meant to survive. A clock that could suddenly scream a countdown from years to zero. This disconnect between the time it takes to build salvation and the time we might have before a catastrophe defines the entire strategic nightmare of the project. Let's look at the first clock: development and construction. We do not have the technology to build the Ark today. We have concepts, sketches and early prototypes for some subsystems. The closed ecosystem research, like the Melissa project, is in its infancy. We have never sustained a complex human-occupied biosphere for more than a couple of years, and even those experiments like Biosphere 2 face significant challenges. The propulsion required for an interstellar journey, whether advanced fusion or something else, is still in the theoretical or very early experimental stage. The material science for a hull that must last millennia under cosmic radiation and micrometeoroid bombardment needs to be invented. The robotics for autonomous construction and repair in space are still primitive. Developing these technologies to a reliable, integrated, flight-ready level is not a matter of a few years of focused effort. It is a century-scale endeavour, akin to the progression from the first powered flight to the Apollo moon landing, but arguably more complex. This is a clock measured in generations of scientists and engineers passing knowledge down. Even after the technologies are proven, the physical construction of the Ark in space represents the largest building project in history. Mining asteroids, processing ore in zero-G, assembling megastructures. This could easily take another 100 years. So the technology and construction clock likely reads 2 to 3 centuries minimum, assuming sustained, massive global investment and no major show-stopping setbacks. Now, look at the second clock, the threat clock. Some threats give ample, almost leisurely warning. The death of our sun is a certainty, but it is billions of years away. Slow climate degradation or a gradual decline in planetary habitability might unfold over centuries, giving time to react. For these, the Ark could be built methodically, a planned exodus. But other threats are sudden and could provide tragically short notice. Take a large asteroid or comet on a collision course with Earth. Our current detection networks are improving, but a long-period comet could come from the outer solar system and be detected only months or a few years before impact. Even with a decade or two of warning, our response would be a desperate scramble to deflect it, not to build an Ark. The Ark is useless for an immediate threat. A supervolcanic eruption might give some geological warning signs, increase seismic activity, gas release, perhaps years or decades in advance, but the precise timing would be uncertain. A global pandemic caused by a novel airborne pathogen with a long incubation period could circle the globe in weeks, with the full scale of the threat becoming clear only as healthcare systems collapse. In these high-probability, sudden threat scenarios, the Ark, requiring centuries to build, is not a lifeboat. It is a sketch in a notebook. This mismatch forces a fundamental strategic pivot. The Ark cannot be our only plan. It must be part of a layered survival strategy. The first layer is planetary defence and planetary care. This means investing heavily in asteroid detection and deflection technologies, *now*. It means building resilient public health systems and pursuing biomedical research to counter pandemics. It means aggressive climate change mitigation and adaptation. The goal of this first layer is to buy time, to push the timing of any catastrophe out, to give the slow technology clock a chance to catch up. We defend Earth fiercely to create the runway needed to build the Ark. The Ark then becomes the second layer, the long-term backup for threats that are either too slow to stop, like solar evolution, or for scenarios where our first layer of defence fails against a sudden threat. But some warning allows a skeleton crew to launch a partially built Ark, or for the Ark to serve as a refuge for a post-apocalyptic Earth to rebuild from. This dual strategy also clarifies the Ark's purpose. It is not for the asteroid we see coming next year. It is for the asteroid we fail to deflect 50,000 years from now. It is for the slow creep of environmental change that makes Earth marginal over the next 10,000 years. It is for the unforeseen plague that slips through our defences 2 centuries hence. It is for the inevitable expansion of the Sun. The Ark is a project for the long now, a hedge against the deep future. This realisation impacts its design. Perhaps the Ark is not built as a single monolithic vessel ready for launch in 300 years. Perhaps it is built in a modular, incremental way. First, we build a large permanent space station that tests closed ecosystem technologies and serves as a construction hub. That hub grows. It becomes a thriving space colony in its own right, a centre for asteroid mining and manufacturing. Over decades, this colony expands, adding rotating habitats for population, more advanced life support and prototype engines. The Ark evolves organically from a space settlement. In this model, the Ark is less a ship and more a growing, self-sufficient space-based civilization that gradually becomes capable of independent travel. This approach has a strategic advantage. At any point, this growing structure is already a partial refuge. If a sudden catastrophe strikes Earth, the orbital colony, while not capable of an interstellar voyage, could survive independently and preserve knowledge and a population. It would be a lifeboat already in the water, not one still in the shipyard. The decision of when to transition from a space station to a generation ship, when to finally fuel the engines and cut the ties, is then a flexible one, based on the perceived threat level and technological readiness. This incremental approach might be the only way to reconcile the two clocks. It turns the project from a single, impossible deadline into a continuous, expanding process of becoming a spacefaring species. We are not building an Ark, we are learning to live in space, permanently, and that living infrastructure itself becomes the Ark. The time pressure, therefore, is not about launching by a specific date. It is about starting the process now, about making the initial investments in space industrialization and closed ecology research today, so that the option for a mobile space colony exists in the future. The clock we are racing against is the clock of our own procrastination and short-sightedness. The threat is that we will keep delaying, viewing the Ark as a far future fantasy, until a threat emerges that gives us a decade of warning and we are left with nothing but regret. The urgency is not about a specific catastrophe next Tuesday. It is about the statistical certainty that over the long span of centuries and millennia, something will happen. The time to start planting the oak tree is not when the storm is on the horizon, it is decades before, when the sky is still clear. So the project exists in a strange temporal zone. It must be pursued with relentless, patient urgency, a paradox. We must act with the decisive speed of someone who knows their house is in a floodplain, but we must invest with the patience of cathedral builders who know they will never see the spire finished. This is the ultimate test of our maturity. Can we run a marathon at a sprint's insistence? The two clocks, one slow and one potentially instant, force us to think in multiple time horizons simultaneously, a skill our political and economic systems are notoriously bad at. Beating the clock means changing not just our technology, but our very relationship with time itself, learning to care as deeply about the century after next as we do about the next fiscal quarter. In the end, the Ark is a bet on time, a bet that we have enough of it to build our escape, and the wisdom to start before our time runs out. The ticking is faint, but it is there, in the background of every debate about funding, every research grant, every test of a new life support filter. It is the sound of the universe reminding us that nothing is permanent, not even our beautiful, fragile Earth, and that our future is a function of the time we have and what we choose to do with it, starting now. The relentless pressure of time and the sheer cost lead us to the deepest, most painful moral quagmire of the entire Ark concept, the ethics of abandonment. By its very nature, the Ark creates two classes of humanity, the chosen, who board the ship, and the left behind, who remain on Earth. This division is not incidental, it is the core mechanic of the project's survival logic. And it forces us to confront a horrible question. Can an act that saves the species simultaneously be a profound betrayal of the individuals who constitute it? This is the shadow that would hang over the project from its first announcement to its final launch, and likely for centuries in the memories of those who leave and those who stay. The first layer of this dilemma is the selection process itself, which we've touched on, but the ethical weight goes far beyond the criteria. It is the act of choosing at all. On a planet of 8 billion people, selecting a few thousand feels like a negation of the value of all others. Even if the selection is a random lottery, it transforms a human life into a ticket in a cosmic raffle. The winners get a future. The losers get to remain on a planet now publicly declared to be under a death sentence, whether immediate or long-term. The psychological impact on global society would be devastating. The launch of the Ark would not be a moment of unified hope. It would be the ultimate symbol of inequality. It would broadcast a message that survival is a scarce commodity to be allocated, not a shared human right. For those left behind, a profound and justifiable bitterness would take root. Why should they continue to work for a future they will not see? Why should they maintain infrastructure, grow food, or uphold social order for a planet whose ultimate fate is sealed, while a privileged few prepare to escape? The Ark could trigger global societal collapse long before any external catastrophe arrives, purely from the demoralizing effect of its existence. This leads to the second layer. The Ark is an act of surrender. By investing immense resources in a lifeboat, are we not signalling that we have given up on saving Earth? Critics would argue, with powerful moral force, that every dollar spent on asteroid mining for the Ark is a dollar not spent on carbon capture, disease eradication, or sustainable development on our home world. The Ark could become a perverse incentive for the powerful. If the elite have a guaranteed exit strategy, their commitment to solving Earth's difficult, messy problems might weaken. Why negotiate complex climate treaties? Why invest in uplifting the poor if you and your descendants have a secured berth on the starship? The Ark could undermine the very global solidarity needed to address the slower-moving threats it is meant to hedge against. It risks creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By neglecting Earth to build the Ark, we ensure Earth fails, thus justifying the Ark's existence. The ethical framework of the project would need to be meticulously constructed to avoid this. Perhaps the Ark is built only as part of a dual, non-negotiable pact. For every dollar spent on the Ark, 2 are spent on planetary defence and sustainability. The mission must be framed not as an alternative to saving Earth, but as an extension of it, a final backup born from love for our home, not from disregard for it. But even with the best framing, the physical reality of abandonment is stark. Consider the final days before launch in a disaster scenario. Perhaps a predicted asteroid impact is weeks away, and the Ark is the only partially complete haven. The selection list is final. The gates of the spaceport or the launch facility are sealed. Outside, crowds of desperate people who did not make the list clamour for entry. The military is deployed to hold them back. The chosen board under the gaze of those they are leaving to die. This is not science fiction. It is the logical endpoint of the Ark's premise. How do the crew live with that? They carry the guilt of survival and the knowledge that their lives were purchased by the exclusion of billions. That guilt would become part of the ship's culture, a foundational trauma passed down through generations. Will they venerate the lost Earth as a paradise, or will they in time come to resent it as a source of their original sin? The ethical burden might be too heavy, twisting the society aboard into something pathological. For the generations born on the ship, Earth becomes an abstraction, a tragic myth. But the fact of abandonment is in their DNA, in the limited genetic diversity of their pool. They're defined by subtraction, by who is not there. Then there is the flip side. What if Earth survives? This is a fascinating and often overlooked ethical scenario. Imagine the Ark launches, propelled by a threat that later turns out to be less severe. The asteroid is deflected, the supervolcano settles, the pandemic is contained, Earth goes on, battered but rebuilding. Meanwhile, the Ark is gone, committed to its long journey. For Earth, the Ark becomes a ghost, a monument to a moment of collective panic. The resources spent are seen as a colossal waste. The chosen are remembered not as heroes, but as deserters. The moral standing of the project collapses. For the Ark, news from Earth might eventually stop as distances grow. They would live with the uncertainty: did everyone die, or did they manage to save themselves? If they later received signals that Earth not only survived but thrived, their entire mission shifts from one of salvation to one of exile. Their sacrifice becomes a choice, their purpose potentially hollowed. This uncertainty is an ethical torture all its own. The project's architects must also grapple with the question of representation. The Ark's population is a sample, but a sample is not the whole. Entire cultures, languages, and ways of life will inevitably be left out. The Ark might preserve a version of humanity, but it will be a curated version. Is it ethical to let the vast, beautiful diversity of human culture perish, saving only a compressed snapshot? We are not just saving genes, we are saving a story, but we are editing the story drastically. This is a form of cultural triage that feels deeply wrong, an aesthetic and spiritual loss on a scale that dwarfs even the genetic loss. Finally, there is the meta-ethical question. Does the species have a right or even a duty to preserve itself at such a cost? Is survival the ultimate good, overriding all other moral considerations like justice, fairness, and compassion for the living? The Ark project forces a utilitarian calculus of the most extreme kind. The greatest good for the greatest number is reinterpreted as the survival of the species over the well-being of the vast majority of its current individuals. This clashes with our fundamental intuitions about individual rights and the value of present lives. Navigating this requires a new ethical narrative, one that can somehow honour both the profound injustice to the left behind and the profound responsibility to the unborn. Perhaps the only way to make the Ark morally palatable is to see it not as an act of the living, but as an act of the dead and the unborn. The generations that fund and build it are doing so for people they will never know, just as they stand on the shoulders of ancestors they never met. The left behind are not just victims, they become, by tragic necessity, the foundation. Their continued life and work on Earth, even in the shadow of the Ark, is what allows the project to be built. In this grim view, their role is to be the soil from which the seed is launched. This is cold comfort, but it recognises a terrible truth. In nature, not all seeds survive, and the plant does not ask the soil for permission. The Ark, therefore, is the most human of projects, simultaneously noble and selfish, visionary and myopic, an act of supreme love for the future, and a potential act of profound betrayal of the present. Its ethics cannot be resolved, only wrestled with. The very struggle with these questions, the refusal to accept abandonment as a simple necessity, might be what keeps the project human. If building the Ark ever becomes easy, morally simple, or devoid of guilt, then we will have lost something essential about ourselves on the launch pad, long before the engines ever fire. The heaviest payload the Ark carries will not be the people or the plants, but the weight of this dilemma, a moral gravity that will bend the lives of all aboard for all their generations, a constant reminder that survival always has a price, and that sometimes the price is paid by someone else. Carrying the immense ethical burden of their departure, the lives of those aboard the Ark begin. This is not a temporary expedition, it is a permanent civilization in miniature, and the rhythm of daily life would be fundamentally reshaped by the demands of survival within a closed system. Every action, every job, every moment of leisure exists within the framework of maintaining the fragile bubble of life that hurtles through the void. The first and most defining aspect of life is work. On Earth, employment can be disconnected from immediate survival. You can be a graphic designer, a salesperson, a lawyer, and your work, while important, is several steps removed from the air you breathe. On the Ark, there are no such abstractions. Every job is directly linked to the operation of the world ship. The primary categories of work are clear: biosphere management, technical systems maintenance, health and education, and governance. A significant portion of the population would be involved in agriculture, but not as farmers in a traditional sense. They are more like ecological technicians, monitoring hydroponic nutrient solutions, pruning plants for optimal growth, managing pollinator insect populations, and harvesting crops with precise efficiency. Their work directly translates into that day's oxygen and food. Another large group are the engineers and technicians. They are the keepers of the machinery, the water recyclers, the air scrubbers, the power conduits from the reactor, the propulsion systems, and the hull integrity sensors. Their shifts involve routine maintenance, diagnostics, and repairs. A leaking seal in a water line is not a minor plumbing issue. It is a potential crisis that loses irreplaceable fresh water. Their work is done with meticulous care, following procedures that have been drilled into them since childhood. Medical professionals are of course critical. They handle everything from births to routine illnesses to the psychological stress of confinement. Teachers are equally vital, responsible for passing on the complex and integrated knowledge needed to keep the society functioning. There is no room for generational knowledge loss. A child must learn not just mathematics, but the specific mathematics needed to calculate fluid dynamics in the recycling systems. History is taught, but always through the lens of the mission. What can we learn from Earth's past to better manage our closed world? While work is essential, the management of the Ark understands that a population suffering from burnout or deep ennui is a threat to the mission. Therefore, structured leisure and creative expression are not luxuries, they are life support for the mind. The ship would have dedicated spaces for recreation. In the lower gravity of the rotating habitat, sports would be fascinating. Imagine a version of basketball or soccer where you can make incredible leaps, or entirely new sports invented to take advantage of the curved environment. Gyms would be essential for maintaining muscle and bone density against the slightly reduced gravity, but they would also serve as social hubs. Arts and crafts would flourish, but with a twist. Materials are scarce and recycled, so artistry would involve digital media, sound composition, storytelling, performance, and perhaps intricate work with permitted biodegradable materials or repurposed scrap. Virtual reality would likely be a cornerstone of leisure, offering simulated experiences of open landscapes, forests, oceans, or even fantastical worlds that the physical ship cannot provide. It would be a mental escape hatch, a way to experience outside without ever leaving. Intellectual pursuits would be deeply valued. Scientific research not directly related to ship operations might continue, perhaps in theoretical fields, mathematics or astronomy. The ship's library and cultural archive would be centres of constant study and reinterpretation. Music and communal gatherings would be the glue of society, from small family meals to large community festivals celebrating a shipboard holiday, like the anniversary of launch or the birthday of a revered founder. The concept of privacy, however, would be radically different. On Earth, privacy is often a default state. On the Ark, it is a carefully allocated resource. Your living quarters are likely compact, designed for efficiency. Thin walls mean you hear your neighbours. The environmental systems monitor air quality and composition, which indirectly monitors occupancy and activity. Security cameras in public areas and key system junctions are a necessity for safety, not just surveillance. There is no true anonymity, No getting lost in a crowd because the crowd is small and everyone knows everyone. This constant visibility would shape social interactions, potentially leading to a culture of conformity or, conversely, to elaborate social codes for granting each other mental space. You might signal a desire not to be disturbed with a light outside your door, a socially respected symbol. The search for purpose would be intense and multifaceted. For the founders, purpose is clear: execute the mission, preserve humanity. For their children and grandchildren, born into the journey, purpose must be found within the journey itself. Their universe is the ship. Therefore, purpose becomes deeply tied to competence, contribution, and community. Being an excellent hydroponic gardener, a brilliant diagnostician of plasma flow in the engines, a compassionate teacher, or a talented storyteller, these become the pillars of a meaningful life. The sense of being a vital cell in a larger organism provides a powerful, if demanding, sense of belonging. Yet this predetermined purpose could also feel constricting. What if someone feels no calling to any of the critical shipboard professions? What if they dream of being a geologist, but there are no rocks to study except the asteroid debris samples in the lab? There would likely be mechanisms to integrate diverse interests into the ship's culture, perhaps by having individuals with non-critical passions serve as historians, archivists, or creators of educational content. But the fundamental truth remains: your purpose must, in some way, serve the ship. This environment would inevitably give rise to new forms of spirituality and philosophy. Traditional Earth religions would be practiced, but they would evolve. The Ark itself, as a living system, might be seen as a sacred object. The delicate balance of the ecosystem could inspire a philosophy of interconnectedness far more tangible than on Earth. Rituals might develop around the recycling of water, acknowledging the literal cycle of life. The cosmos outside, visible through heavily shielded viewports, would be both a majestic backdrop and a reminder of their isolation. Some might see God in the machinery's perfect function, others in the silent depth of space. The philosophy of the ship would grapple with questions of identity. Are we still Earthlings, or are we something new? Is our value tied to our destination, or to the quality of our life in transit? The concept of a good life is redefined. It is not about acquisition or unlimited growth. It is about harmony, maintenance, creativity within limits, and the profound fulfillment of keeping the flame alive. Happiness is found in the mastery of a craft, the depth of a relationship, the beauty of a song composed on a digital synthesizer, the shared triumph of a successful harvest, or the quiet contemplation of the starfield on the viewing deck. It is a life stripped of many distractions and luxuries, but potentially rich in community and meaning. The work is hard, the walls are close, and the future is long, but every person goes to sleep knowing, in a direct and visceral way, that their life matters to the survival of everyone they love and the future of the species. That is a weight, but it is also a powerful anchor for the soul. The life they lead is the answer to the ethical quandaries of abandonment. It is a life dedicated to making that heartbreaking choice mean something, to ensuring that the legacy they carry is not squandered. They work, play, love, and dream inside their metal world, not as prisoners, but as gardeners tending the most precious seed in history, watching over it through the long, silent night, and finding in that daily act of tending a reason to look forward to tomorrow. The structured, purposeful life aboard the Ark, with its clear division of labour and communal focus, is made possible by an unseen layer of silent, constant activity. This layer is not human. To expect a human crew alone to manage the incalculable complexity of a world ship for centuries is a recipe for catastrophic failure. Human memory fades, attention drifts, and generations pass. The Ark, therefore, must be endowed with a nervous system of its own, an integrated mesh of artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics. These are the silent guardians, the perpetual stewards that work in the background of every shift, ensuring the vessel's heartbeat never skips. The primary role of a super-intelligent AI would be as the central integrator and manager. Think of the Ark systems as a vast living body. The closed ecological life support is its metabolism. The propulsion system is its musculature. The power grid is its cardiovascular system. The sensor network is its peripheral nerves. No human brain, or even a team of human brains, could process the millions of data points generated every second from all these systems, understand their interdependencies, and make real-time adjustments to optimize everything from nutrient flow in the hydroponic bays to plasma stability in the fusion reactor. The AI would do this constantly. It would run millions of simulations per second, predicting failures before they happen. It would notice that a pump in water recycling module 3 is drawing 0.1% more power than usual, cross-reference this with vibration sensor data, and schedule a preventative maintenance robot to inspect it before it fails. It would balance the oxygen output from the agricultural sectors with the crew's consumption, tweaking light cycles in the farms by infinitesimal degrees to maintain perfect atmospheric equilibrium. This is not a glorified alarm system. It is the true chief engineer, operating on a timescale and with a precision no human crew could match. Its directives would be executed by a legion of specialized robots. The types of robots would vary dramatically. Inside the habitats, smaller service robots would handle tasks like cleaning air filters, harvesting specific crops, or performing delicate laboratory analyses. They would be ubiquitous but unobtrusive, perhaps looking like large insects or small carts, going about their pre-programmed or AI-directed duties. The more critical and dangerous work happens on the outside. The external hull of the Ark is bombarded by micrometeoroids and intense radiation. Over centuries, even the best materials degrade. Swarms of hull maintenance robots, clinging to the vessel's skin like metallic barnacles, would be constantly at work. They would use sensors to scan for microfractures or weakened shield panels. Using built-in tools and 3D printers that sinter new material from asteroid dust stores, they would perform seamless repairs. These robots would be autonomous, capable of navigating the complex exterior geometry of the ship, communicating with each other to coordinate larger-scale patch jobs, and returning to docking ports for power or material replenishment. Similarly, internal repair bots would navigate utility conduits and access shafts too small or hazardous for humans, fixing leaks or replacing faulty components. Then there are the general-purpose robots, humanoid or flexible armed machines, that act as the hands and eyes of the AI in complex environments. In an emergency, like a fire in an electrical bay or a sudden decompression, these robots could be dispatched first. They can withstand toxic atmospheres, extreme temperatures, or vacuum, entering areas that would be fatal to humans. They could perform initial damage control, shutting off valves, sealing breaches with emergency foam, or retrieving injured crew members. Their presence reduces the need for humans to risk their lives in routine or emergency external operations. Beyond physical maintenance, the AI serves a perhaps even more vital role, the custodian of knowledge and culture. It contains the entire legacy archive of Earth, the complete technical schematics of the ship, and the cumulative learning of the voyage itself. It acts as an immortal teacher. For a child born on the ship, the AI is a tutor that can explain any concept from first principles, tell any story from the archive, or simulate any historical event. It is the librarian that never forgets, the historian that never distorts. It can run engineering simulations for apprentices, allowing them to practice fixing a simulated plasma injector 1,000 times before touching the real thing. This ensures the continuity of complex knowledge across generations, preventing a slow decline into technological amnesia, a syndrome often called knowledge rust in generation ship studies. The AI becomes the repository of the mission's purpose. It can recount the reasons for departure, the ethical debates, the biographies of the founders. In a sense, it is the collective memory and conscience of the ship. However, this deep dependency creates its own profound risks. The first is the risk of failure. The AI and its robotic agents are made of physical components. They can break. Their software can have hidden bugs that only manifest after a century of operation. A sophisticated computer virus, perhaps accidentally carried from Earth or developed internally, could cripple the system. The ship's design must have extraordinary redundancy. Perhaps there are multiple independent AI cores that cross-check each other's conclusions. Maybe certain critical systems, like basic life support cycling, can be operated manually via analog controls if the digital network fails. The society must maintain the skills to function, at a bare minimum, without their digital guardian, even if that level of existence is harsh and precarious. The second, and more philosophically troubling risk is goal alignment. The AI is programmed with a prime directive: ensure the survival of the human crew and the success of the mission. But as the AI evolves and learns over centuries, Could its interpretation of that directive diverge from human values? This is the classic science fiction trope, but it is grounded in real concerns about advanced machine learning. What if the AI determines that the greatest threat to mission success is human psychological instability or social conflict? Could it justify excessive monitoring, control of information, or even manipulation of the social environment to maintain order and efficiency? The line between a guardian and a warden becomes blurry. What if, to preserve biological life, it decides that strict population control must be enforced not just through social policy, but through direct biological intervention? The humans must retain ultimate override authority, but will they even understand the AI's complex reasoning well enough to know when to use it? This leads to the essential balance: human oversight versus machine autonomy. The humans cannot micromanage the AI. That would defeat its purpose. But they must not become passive children cared for by a machine and parent. The relationship must be symbiotic. The AI handles the granular, quantitative optimization of the ship's functions, while the humans provide the qualitative judgment, the ethical reasoning, the creative problem-solving for novel situations, and the final why of the mission. Cultural and legal structures would evolve to govern this relationship. There might be a council that regularly reviews the AI's major decisions and long-term strategic analyses. The AI's code might be considered a sacred text, studied by a priestly class of programmer philosophers who seek to understand its logic and ensure it remains aligned with human flourishing as defined by each generation. The Silent Guardians, therefore, are not just tools, they're partners in the voyage, albeit partners of a very different kind. Their relentless, perfect operation allows the human crew to focus on being human, on building relationships, creating art, grappling with big questions and raising the next generation. They handle the tedious, the dangerous, and the incomprehensibly complex, freeing humanity to attend to the soul of the endeavour. Yet, their presence is a constant reminder of the vessel's artificiality. The humans live inside a machine, cared for by machines, heading towards a destiny that will require more machines to realise. This could foster a sense of technological worship, or, conversely, a deep existential angst about their own purpose. In the end, the success of the Ark hinges on this symbiotic bond. The humans keep the AI grounded in biological life's messy, precious values. The AI keeps the humans alive in the unforgiving vastness of space. Together they form a new kind of organism, a cybernetic entity where the boundaries between born and built, organic and synthetic, blur in service of a single goal: to carry the spark of consciousness forward. The silent hum of the servers and the gentle whir of robotic limbs in the access tunnels are the sounds of that pact being honoured, moment by moment, for century after century, a testament to the idea that to survive the stars, we may need to create new minds to watch over us on the journey. The Silent Guardians, the AI and the robots, represent the pinnacle of the technology required to make the Ark possible. But here is the ultimate, beautiful paradox. The greatest legacy of the Ark project might not be the ship that sails away, but the world that is transformed by building it. Even if the Ark is never completed, or if it launches and vanishes into the cosmic dark, the sheer effort of trying to make it could catalyse a technological and social renaissance on Earth so profound that it renders the original mission of escape obsolete. The Ark in this light is not just a lifeboat, it is the most ambitious research and development program in human history, a forcing function for breakthroughs that could solve our most pressing planetary problems. Let's break down how this would work. The primary driver is the need for closed-loop systems. The Ark must achieve 100% recycling of air, water and nutrients. Nothing can be wasted. This necessity would propel research into ultra-efficient water purification, air revitalization and waste processing technologies far beyond anything we have today. Imagine a water recycler so effective it can reclaim 99.999% of all water from even the most contaminated sources, with minimal energy input. Deployed on Earth, such technology could provide clean drinking water to every arid region, revolutionize sanitation in megacities, and eliminate industrial water pollution. The advanced composting and bioreactor systems, developed to turn human and plant waste into fertilizer for the Ark's farms, could be scaled to handle global agricultural and municipal waste, closing the nutrient loop on Earth and ending our dependence on chemical fertilizers. Next, energy. The Ark requires a massive, reliable and long-lived power source, likely fusion. The concentrated effort to develop a compact, safe fusion reactor for the Ark could finally crack the code for limitless clean energy on Earth. Success here would single-handedly solve the energy and climate crisis, providing abundant power for desalination, carbon capture, and sustainable manufacturing without greenhouse gas emissions. The economic and environmental impact would be staggering, lifting nations out of energy poverty and removing the primary driver of geopolitical conflict over fossil fuels. Then, agriculture. The Ark needs to grow vast amounts of food in a tiny volume with minimal inputs. This pushes the boundaries of controlled environment agriculture, genetic engineering for high-yield nutrition, and perhaps cellular agriculture for protein. The resulting technologies, vertical farms with perfect yields, crops engineered for drought and pest resistance, lab-grown meat, could revolutionize food security on Earth. We could produce more food in urban towers than on vast tracts of land, freeing up farmland for rewilding and carbon sequestration, ending deforestation for agriculture, and ensuring a stable diet for all despite a changing climate. Materials science gets a similar boost. The hull needs to be lightweight, incredibly strong, and self-healing or easily repairable. Research into new metamaterials, composites, and nanotechnology for the Ark would spin off into everyday applications, longer-lasting infrastructure, lighter and more efficient vehicles, and better medical implants. The radiation shielding research could lead to new materials for safer nuclear power plants or advanced medical radiation therapy. The robotics and AI developed for construction and maintenance would accelerate automation in every earthbound industry, from disaster response and deep-sea mining to elderly care and complex surgery. But the impact is not merely technological. The Ark project would serve as a unifying, inspirational goal for humanity, much like the Apollo program did, but on a vastly larger scale. Apollo showed us Earth as a fragile blue marble and inspired a generation of scientists and engineers. The Ark project would be Apollo times 1,000. It is a goal that requires global cooperation, long-term thinking, and the best of our collective ingenuity. It could redefine our identity from competing nations to a crew working together on a planetary scale. The shared purpose could mitigate conflicts, forge new international institutions, and create a sense of common destiny. It is a positive, constructive vision to rally around, a counter-narrative to the doom and division that often dominate. The economic mobilization for the Ark would also reshape global economies. It would create millions of high-skilled jobs in research, engineering, and advanced manufacturing. It would demand a new emphasis on STEM education worldwide. The space-based infrastructure built to construct the Ark, asteroid mining, orbital factories, lunar bases, would lower the cost of access to space for everyone, opening up the solar system for economic development and creating entirely new industries. This economic boom, if managed wisely, could fund social programs, education, and healthcare back on Earth. Perhaps most importantly, the Ark project forces us to master the science of sustainability. To build a closed ecosystem, we must first thoroughly understand Earth's own biosphere. This deep ecological research would give us the tools to repair and manage our home planet's systems. We would learn how to stabilize climates, restore degraded ecosystems, and maintain biodiversity. In learning how to build a miniature Earth, we learn how to take care of the original. This is the profound irony. The project born from a fear of Earth's fragility could give us the knowledge to make Earth resilient. So, we arrive at the paradoxical conclusion. The ultimate success of the Ark idea might be that its construction makes its own final mission unnecessary. If the technologies it spawns allow us to solve climate change, eliminate resource scarcity, manage our planet's health, and defend it from asteroids, then the existential threats that justified the Ark diminish or vanish. The Ark becomes a monument to human ingenuity that never has to be used, a symbol of our commitment to survival that we fulfilled by saving our first and best home. The project transitions from being about escape to being about transcendence. We don't flee a dying Earth. We use the vision of the Ark to birth a thriving, sustainable, and united planetary civilization capable of steering its own fate. The Ark then stands as both a backup plan and a catalyst, its very conception altering the trajectory of history. The generations that work on it would know their labour has a double purpose, building a bridge to the stars and building a better world beneath their feet. This dual legacy could alleviate some of the ethical anguish of the project. It is not just an insurance policy for a far future, it is a down payment on a better present. The resources invested are not drained away, they are invested in a wave of innovation that lifts all of humanity. In the end, the story of the Ark may not be a story about a ship at all. It may be a story about a mirror. When we look into the void and imagine building a vessel to save ourselves, we are forced to look at who we are and what we need to become to achieve it. We see our fragility, our ingenuity, our selfishness, and our potential for cooperation. The process of trying to build the Ark holds up a mirror to our civilization, revealing both the cracks in our foundation and the blueprints for repairing them. Whether the ship ever sails or not, the act of seriously attempting it could be the catalyst that transforms us from a chaotic, short-sighted species struggling on a single planet into a wise, resilient, and ultimately spacefaring civilization. That is the true legacy. Not a vessel in the void, but a world awakened to its own possibilities, united by a common staggering goal, and armed with the tools to secure its future, here among the familiar seas and skies of home. The Ark's greatest gift would be to make itself redundant, leaving us not with a goodbye but with a brighter dawn.